Okay, we're back on KS Reality Talks, and we are here with Rose Tobin. And Rose, I would just like you to introduce yourself and give some background of your participation in the group and where you're located, etc.
Of course, Chris. And I just like to thank you for giving me this opportunity as well. I think you're doing tremendous work in creating these conversations for all sides of all viewpoints and perspectives to be heard and expressed. I think that's extremely valuable. And I would just want to thank you for that. And I just want to say hello to people as well. Anybody watching this, if we've been friends or if we've been in touch or even if we haven't been in touch, I just want to say hello. It's like a nice chance to reconnect with people that I may not have seen for several years. Yes, Chris, so maybe, yeah, it would be valuable to give a bit of an overview of my involvement with the Keylontic Science and the Azurite Press, because especially anybody who came on board since about 2011, 2012 may not know me or may not have met me or my husband Noel. So yeah, I'm here in Dublin in Ireland, and the room that you see behind me was actually the Azurite Press office for Europe for many years. So we came across Aisha's work, Ashiana's work in 2001. And at the time, I was involved in a lot of healing modalities and New Age processes, etc. And I was teaching Reiki. And one of my students gave me a flyer for the workshop that Shiana and Michael were offering in Dublin. You may have seen it. It was one of the Cathara One workshops. So Noel was very attracted to that. I had something on that weekend, but Noel went to that workshop and he came back absolutely fascinated. It like he discovered something really, really precious. And as you know, with these workshops, like it was supposed to be, say, from 9 to 5, and he disappeared for the whole weekend because there was so much material, and she covered so much material about Cathara. And then it expanded. It was supposed to be just the weekend, and then for the Monday and the Tuesday, it expanded into what became the Arthurian Roundtable Workshop. I don't know if you've seen that one. And they went out to Ireland's Eye. So he disappeared for 5 days and was absolutely fascinated. So, of course, when I saw his fascination, he had the Cathara One manual and I started looking at that. And then somebody gave us a gift of the Tangible Structure of the Soul workshop set. There's an audio set with a handbook. And I started using the processes. And I found it didn't take me long to realize that this had been something I really had been looking for. I've been exploring really, and I'm in my 60s now, so since my early 20s, I have been looking for, like I think many of us can identify with this. We've looked for truth and meaning in many, many places, and you get something from everything. I don't think anything is completely wrong, but when I practiced these new techniques, it was mainly the Maharic seal, and in the Tangible Structure set, I can still remember how I experienced, there was one of the processes was connecting with the solar rishi, and I could just feel a whole sense of myself expanding and yet being very much more grounded. And that, for a lot of my spiritual life, if you like, there was that ache for connection. I had been looking for that. I think there's a song somewhere, looking for love in all the wrong places. Well, I'd been looking for that connection, getting near to it, but never quite getting there. And when I discovered those early techniques, I knew this was it. I just knew. And so I just was playing with those. Playing is actually the word, because it did bring me a lot of joy as well. And at that time, it didn't dawn on me that there might be a contradiction between that and some of the other work I was doing. So then Noel went to the workshop in September, which became the Mechanics of Manifestation workshop set, which again, probably you and some people have seen that one. It was a beautiful workshop. And that was just before the September 11th event. So he was at that. And then about a month after that, Shiana made the One World Order set, which was explaining the lead up to what happened in September the 11th. And for me, that was a major wake-up call, because she outlined the various agendas that were going on, including many of the agendas in the New Age movement, and a bit about the Merkaba mechanics and all of that. And so I actually went through a lot of very deep inner questioning for about a month because I was involved in a lot of these systems and I was teaching some of them. And I actually realized that what she was saying was right. I just knew it on a gut level. And at the time, it was a much, much smaller organization, as you can imagine. And I wrote to at that time, I called them Michael and Anna. I mean, I didn't know what names to call them. And I just explained what I'd been doing. And I said, I've always wanted to serve what I call the light. I'd always wanted to serve the highest purpose, which I think is true of nearly everybody in our chaos family. Whatever that, however that presents itself to us, we want to serve that. So that was my motivation, and just asking them, like, this is what I've been involved in. What do I do? How do I go ahead with that? And I can always remember the reply that I got from Michael, a son, however people know him, and it was actually what sold me to KS. And I want to give him credit for that because he was very direct about, yes, some of the work you've been doing would not be in line with our work, put it that way. But he had a tremendous respect. I got a tremendous sense of respect from him that I was willing to look at that and have the courage to look at it. And I've always been grateful to him for that. So anyway, to speed forward, because it's important to look at that early background. And then, of course, I realized from that some of the other work I was doing was not really as empowering as I thought it was. And so I started to move away from that. But what I did is we introduced the basics of Keylontic science to my students, actually, to my Reiki students, if they wanted to. And when I was doing any of the Reiki work, I would bring in the frequencies of D12 with the groups. And then I gradually tapered off. And actually several of those early students became very keen KS students. So it did have some benefit in that way. So fast forward, then sometime in 2002, they asked us to set up the Ireland Azurite Press office. Now, of course, that would have been a very small office, really, but we started to produce the workshops, etc., here for the local Irish group, which again was only a dozen people at most. So we did that, and then my first live workshop. Now, I was already starting to run an office because they had met Noel. Noel had met them several times, and I had started to study Cathara. And I can't remember exactly when in that year I became one of the first people to be certified as a Cathara Alliance teacher, which was to teach Cathara 1. But in 2002, in June, I went to my first live workshop, which was the Greek Dance for Love. Again, you may have seen that one. So that was my first live meeting with the three speakers. And then from there on, I would think that between Noel and myself, we were at almost every workshop until June 2012. There were a few very early ones we missed, but one of us would have been at everything except for those early ones, and often the two of us went. So we often both went to the American workshops. We were both in India. We were both at several of them. And also in 2002, we helped Aisha or I'm going to call them at that time, they were Ashiana and Michael, or Isan, all the different names, but we helped them to organize 2 of the UK workshops. So we actually did all of the organization of the hotel, and in collaboration, I think, with whoever was running the American office, we did the bookings for the UK Dance for Love, which was UK Dance, I think it was called Dance for Love 2 in the catalogue. And then also we were both in France for the Dance for Freedom, and we helped to organize the Dance for Freedom 2, which again was held in the UK. So we had a lot of input into the organization. And again, in 2003, they needed to come to Ireland for 2 workshops. And again, we organized all of that. We organized the venue and, for example, the Forbidden Testaments of Revelation, which was February 2003. And that was supposed to be a weekend workshop, and it ended up taking a week, as these things happen, because they requested us to bring a group of people down to the west of Ireland. We were just learning at that point about the Ark of the Covenant gates, and that Ark 1 was in County Limerick. in Ireland. So we took about, I think it was 80 or 90 people down there at the last minute notice. So we did a lot of that. And then we also helped to organize on the product catalogue, it was SYCA, the Secrets of the Yugas workshop. Okay, so we had quite a lot of organizational input in those years, as well as Noel being involved on the recording team and helping with all of the video equipment and all of that. So it also
He was filming, right?
um,
He was operating the
he
camera.
he was he was often operating the camera, but as well as that, no, but there were other people as well. Like there was another man, Dan, in the early days who did a super job, and then what Noel's input a lot of the time was he was helping to get the best possible equipment, and the most economical but best equipment, and he often gave a lot of technical advice and would do research. So some of the time he was actually doing the filming in later years, but he and Scotty and whoever else was doing the filming, it was mainly those two most of the time, and a man called Jim, they would collaborate a lot and try and get the best equipment and the best results. And just while we're speaking about that, I do want to give them all some credit, because it was implied in 2012 that the recording team were interfering with some of the work, some of the materials and the products and the finished product. And, I never saw any evidence of that. And it's really important for people to understand the challenges they were working under sometimes, the sudden changes of venue. I mean, a very real example, because I was there, was in St. Kitts, which was Sliders 3. And we would be in at the workshop, and then suddenly, we have to go out on the beach. And you're familiar with machines and wires, and you can't just shove everything into a bag and run out and put it out again. Everything had to be unpacked, put away properly, then brought out, and then sometimes assembled in the dark to be ready for the workshop. And then we'd be back again. And then another time, when they were displaying the logos on the beach, there was sand getting in the material, in the equipment. I mean, it was very, very challenging. So occasionally a line or two would be missed because of that, but there was never any tampering. And like the people who were doing the recording, as you know, and have you been to live workshops?
No, never.
Right. Well, at the live workshops, especially in the latter years when there was what we call guardian time, and we might be waiting for hours for the next updates, but one member of the recording team would have to stay in the hall all of that time. So they might have to stay 8 hours during the night to actually keep the machinery going and then be alert to do the recording. Right. So, I mean, Noel never drinks coffee, but I sometimes was pouring coffee into him. So, they really did work very, very hard. And I think they were given a very bad, it was just, it was implied that they were interfering with the material, which, I just want to put a good word in for them,
I mean, I don't want to go too far into it, but I know that the big thing now is like with the masters and all this back and forth with that. And that's what I've taken upon myself to try to get my own answers with that too, asking people that I know and things. But I know it's still kind of in litigation, is it? Like the court's still going and everything. So I can't go too far into that, I guess. But.
Not at the moment, but it is a very complex situation, absolutely. But I just want to say that, though, that that the recording team did absolutely Trojan work under very, very difficult circumstances, because everybody else during that guardian time, everybody else could go up and have a rest or go out and have a coffee. But they had to stay there with the equipment, or else completely pack it up again. As you know, that doesn't take just 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Every wire has to be whatever, they have to do all of that. And, in some countries, there were significant safety risks in assembling that equipment in places like India. Even in the most expensive, fancy hotels with marble everywhere, their electrics were often very dodgy. And like Noel said, sometimes if he was doing those, and I think in both of those situations, and if he didn't really know his stuff, he could get yourself electrocuted.
Right.
So there were a lot of they really did a lot of very, very good work. So anyway, that's just to say that I did want to say that. So yeah, I mean, so just over those years, I was also very involved in the e-group, because one of the things that really attracted me to the work was were the early documents such as the Law of One and the Handbook for the Tangible Structure of the Soul, the ANRs, and they were all about our direct, intimate connection to Source. And I'd never got that anywhere else. All right. I was beginning to feel it. And when you begin to feel that, you begin to get a sense of your own worth in a way that is not dependent on anything from outside. And I found in those early days in the e-group that there was a tremendous freedom to express yourself truthfully once you were respectful of other people. So there was a freedom to express your challenges as you were doing this, and your challenges with coming into integrity. And I just found it a very, very powerful sort of platform for self-exploration. And then what kind of was fascinating to me is when you explore yourself truthfully, it resonates with other people. And there was a tremendous amount of, community spirit in Chaos in the early days, both in the e-group, which was for me a fountain of information, because there were many people who gradually over the years began to understand the work very well, including Cathara team members, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And they would answer questions from newcomers and really knowledgeable, and they would go back and check the work and make sure they were absolutely accurate in what they were saying. And I think we all had a good sense of distinguishing between when we were writing from our own sort of interpretation of something and when we were actually presenting the material. This is the verbatim bit and this is my interpretation. So it was, yeah, and it was very big, yeah. And it was a wonderful venue. And it did create a lot of community spirit. And the early workshops as well. There was a really sense of family. I mean, for many of us, it's like, because I think especially people who have been on a spiritual journey for a long time, I actually think if we have to face a certain amount of our own solitude and our own loneliness, I think we all have had to do that, to break away from structures and come into our own power. Okay. And I think that's happened for a lot of people since the split as well. And I will talk about that. But many of us had felt that. And so when we came into finding that there was this family of consciousness that we felt a part of, there was a tremendous joy and there was a lot of goodwill. There was a great sense of having a common purpose. And that great sense, which was so much in the early teachings, that we were all equal. Some people had more knowledge and totally willing to recognize that the speakers had knowledge that we didn't have, but our worth was not questioned. And that is throughout the early work, right? I don't know if you've read the Synocracy document.
Yeah.
I've read that one, right?
Absolutely.
So it's so much in that, whether somebody is playing a so-called high role or low role, they're all equally loved and equally beloved and equally valued. And one isn't more important than the other, right? One is just playing a different role. So there was a great sense of that in the early days, of community and family, and we're all in this together and we all have something to offer. And it was in that spirit that the Cathara team was started to be developed, because I can't remember the exact year the Cathara team started. The Cathara Alliance was
right when it formed.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, the Cathara Alliance was first, and that was where several of us kind of really studied the Cathara manual, and then we did quite an extensive, what you call those, multiple choice questionnaire to do, and we had to submit an audio or video of ourselves teaching. So it was quite, you had to work for it. Okay,
yeah. To get certified.
To get certified, yeah. And yes, and then after a while, as you know, even then, and I mean not remotely like now, the work was so extensive that it was kind of, well, where does a newcomer start?
Yeah.
Okay, to come into this, and there's just so much information. So gradually, there were several people who had become Cathara Alliance members or were very interested in helping to promote Keylontic science, that we began to, I think it was, well, it was all the speakers. I mean, they all knew we were setting up the Cathar team, but Mac was the main person that we were connecting with. And it was a group of people, a small group to start with, but it grew, of people who knew the basics really well and then had a particular interest in maybe different areas of the work. Because as you know, when you look at the work, I mean, there's a whole kind of spiritual awareness level, it's a whole personal development level, there's a whole level to do with the mathematics, there's another whole area to do with the history, and and another
Anatomy.
to do with grids, anatomy, all of that. So there's so many different layers, and we knew that they were all interrelated. But if somebody came in, where do they start? So what the
Right.
Cathara team used to do, with great dedication, because this would take a lot of time, is we would go for where we naturally felt affinity, right? So for me, it was we put together modules. Okay, and for example, I can speak for myself. The one that I was most attuned to was the whole area of love, and I did the postures of love and the steps towards joy. So my process in that was to go through. I can't say I went through every single piece of work up to that date. It was around 2006, but I certainly went through nearly everything because I'd been to most of the workshops anyway. Okay, but I went through nearly everything, or as much as I could, and picked out. And this would be the same for anybody, say, doing the maths or whatever. But you go through everything, pick out the parts that are related to the topic you were focusing on, and then put it together in a form that would bring out the main points. And then a lot of the time we also would have presented it as a live workshop, which would be recorded, and then that would become a product. Okay, so that's what happened.
Just real
Now,
quick, you
yeah,
said that
yeah,
people
sure.
would meet with Mac, like for the Cathar team and everything. When did she come in? She was in before you came in, or
You mean as a speaker
yeah,
or
yeah. Well,
involved? Yeah, as far as I know, I remember.
she didn't
I
come in
think
directly as a speaker then. She was there
not in
for a
the
while.
very. Now she could tell you that herself, but what I
Mm,
remember, I don't think she was when we discovered KS in the summer of 2001. Okay, and at that time there wasn't a third speaker, as far as I know. And with between then and about Christmas, I have a feeling it might have actually have been during the One World Order workshop that
okay.
Ashiana announced that
It
Mac was the third
it was
speaker.
like
It was around that
during her
time.
workshop that she announced it, right? Like it was on one of the products. I remember. It seems like she
It
announced it.
it might have been that one.
Yeah.
Now they did know each other for a good while before that, and Mac
Right.
had helped Yesha organize several workshops. She
Okay.
was the one who did a lot of
Sure.
what what Darlene obviously ended up
Mm-hmm.
doing the major workshops,
Yeah.
and what we might have done in the UK
She
and
didn't just
Ireland.
come in as a speaker. I mean, there was a build up to this, and she
Oh
dedicated a
yes, yeah.
lot of work towards this first. So,
Yes,
yeah.
as far as I know now, and again, we can check this before we go live. But if we haven't corrected
Mm,
it,
yeah.
right, this is accurate.
Yeah.
That she came across Ashiana earlier and helped, for example, her to. Yes, I'm pretty sure she said that she had a very strong inner guidance that she was to help Aisha Ashiana organize that very first trip to Peru. That was never recorded, but there was a trip to Peru. I don't know when it was, but it's certainly before we came across her. It could have been in 2000. So, and Mac would also have organised the venue and everything for the One World Order Agenda Workshop because that was held in Allentown, right?
It was
And they
never
were both
released. It was recorded. There's a recording going around actually of
of One World Order.
the Peru one that
Oh, the
wasn't
Peru, yes.
released.
I
Yeah.
think there's some informal versions of it
Mm-hmm.
going around.
Yep.
But at that time, there probably wasn't a formal
Yeah.
recording set up. Okay,
Yeah.
so anyway,
But
so
yeah.
Mac, yeah, so Mac would have been on would have been. I mean, she was in. I'm not sure if she was in Ireland that time when Noel met her, but certainly she was around a lot and she was helping a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't just come in at the last minute. Okay, and at a certain point, then it was announced that she was a speaker because the whoever else we know were to be speakers couldn't fulfill the contract. Okay,
Yeah.
so anyways, fast forward. Gosh, this is taking time, but it's good to give a kind
No,
of an
it's
overview,
good solid foundation here that we need.
solid
Yep.
foundation. And I want people to get a sense too of how much collaboration there was,
Yep.
and how much sense of freedom and expression and respect for everybody that there was. There was a lot of fun. And, for us, we kind of felt, gosh, we're meeting old friends. We can be ourselves, and
Did
it
you
was that really,
have memories, like in past lives, of doing the work before with people? Was it that intimate on these levels?
yeah. I've never really had very vivid either interdimensional or past life experiences, but I actually think to some extent it's been in my protection.
Yeah, yeah,
Because, and I think even I heard Aisha say in the very early days, your past lives are all around you.
yeah,
You know? And so when we meet people and we have an instant sense of recognition, but that has to come from somewhere, right?
yeah.
And when we just know things, or you get that deja vu
Mm-hmm.
thing, but I actually think I might have deliberately chosen not to, because from what I've seen, both in my experience in the New Age movement and indeed over some of what we've seen happening in our shield, I think, unless we're very strong in our own power and we start seeing into other dimensions, it can be distracting.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it can actually, our most, I mean, this again was in the early work, our most important responsibility is to nurture our own Christ connection, is our own Christ spark, and to nurture that and to begin to trust it. And our first port of call when we need guidance and when we need to know where to go, ideally is we go within our own being and feel out the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is actually acting in a responsible Christian way, because we actually have a responsibility to do that, because otherwise we're giving our power away. And in the very early work, there was I think it might have originally have been in the Angelic Realities book, the questions for discernment. And that was another thing that really, really said to me, KS is okay, because I'd been through so many systems and I had seen, you know, guru type people. I know, we were in Mount Shasta for WESAC. I've seen a lot of that stuff. Okay. And the questions for discernment were really, really important for me. And one of those was, the few of them were, where is this being asking you to put your power? What is it asking of me? All right. And to me, that's a core question, even in terms of what I want to say later about how I see things at present. Okay. But where does this ask me to put my power? Is it in my own knowing, or is it in their authority? And if they're asking me to give them my authority, as it were, what might be behind that? Why would they want me not to listen to myself, basically? And I remember again in the early days, Ashiana used to say things like, if an angel appears to you and looks very impressive, you have a right to ask for its resume.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
ask it for its resume, and
That
don't
stands out
ever
in chaos a lot. Like, it's a big
absolutely,
one.
ask for its resume and what it needs, and ask what's it asking me to do with my power. Okay, so those things really resonated with me, because I had seen a lot of stuff about ascended masters, and and at the time I did believe in all of the ascended masters and all of that stuff, so it was quite a revelation to me, right? So those were some of the things in KS that really were very powerful for all of us. So anyway, I think I'll just make sure I've covered all our involvement. And oh right, yes, we also, because I loved the whole work so much, I spent a lot of time sharing it. I in 2000 and up to 2005, we had started to do outreach. That was part of the whole Cathara team initiative as well, is to make Cathara and Keylontic science more accessible and to reach out to to new people. And a lot of the people who eventually became members of the Cathara team did amazing work. I'm not going to mention names because you can always leave out people,
Yeah.
but there were a few people, for example, in England who did incredible work, and also went around various parts of Europe. There was a tremendously active group in the Netherlands, and again, the initial people doing that were the people in London, and then there were people and then eventually, when I was preparing for this session with you, Chris, I just added up, and I actually taught some aspect of KS, mainly Cathara 1 or the modules or some of Cathara 2 in 12 European countries.
Yeah.
As well as within, sometimes at the main workshops, we would do modules. So, and in the year 2005, when Ashiana and Azania, because they're there, but that was supposed to be their names at the time, when they were asked to move back to the US after the Morocco workshop. I don't know if you know that, but after the Morocco workshop, they were instructed to go back to the US, and I think it was Colorado they went to first. So they asked us to take over the UK office at the time, okay, and it was kind of the UK European office, really. And of course, because we are in Ireland, we don't describe ourselves as UK, right? So whole
Yeah.
political thing there. So I just called it the European office, okay, because
Yeah.
that's really what it was. So we obviously got a lot busier with the office because the work was expanding, largely thanks to the work of the Cathara team and particular people, in particular, who were going all over Europe and parts of the States and Canada. There was a lady in Canada as well who did incredible work. A lady, and there was a group in Montreal. There was a group in Calgary, and all thanks to the local people there who spread it locally. So
There
we
was
took
a
over the office.
just real quick.
Sorry.
There was a lady here in Denver that was actually doing workshops back then too. Who was almost like a change of the guards thing. Like right when I came in, she was moving, I believe, from Colorado. I think she was at some part around here, and moving to New Mexico. And so she was like updating me and briefing me on the grids out here and everything that she had done and stuff. So there was like a lot of outreach that was really active during that time. She was just taking it upon herself just to go out and put flyers up and
Good
teach
for her.
Cathara, rent out spaces, and just a lot of initiative there back then.
There was a lot of initiative, and it was really, really motivated by love of the work. It really was. It was this enthusiasm, and like the Cathar team, or if we taught a course, you would get a little bit of income, but for the amount of time we put into it, it was very modest.
Yeah.
It was just the pure love of sharing the information. And for example, in some time within that framework, it might have been a bit later, we began to get some customers from the Czech Republic, and some of them were very, very keen for us to do a workshop there. So one of the other teachers, and she knows, and I want to give her credit, she knows who she is, I don't want to mention names, but we went to Prague to do a workshop, and we had people translating if necessary. I think we had about 20, 25 people for Cathara 1. And then the next day we were doing, the ordinations we used to do, and we had 70 people for ordinations in Prague. Yeah. And people just loved it. And even if they couldn't understand a lot of what we were saying, they could feel the frequency from the codes and from the songs. So they absolutely loved it. Okay. So there was a lot of outreach, a lot of love, and a lot of sense that we were all pulling together and we were all sharing this information that was so empowering for many people. And so so in 2005, then I'm just really talking about my own experience mainly. I would have been doing a lot of that teaching, and I can't remember exactly when I helped to put that work, the module of postures and love and steps towards joy, but that was part of what I was doing. Another part of what I was doing was I had a great interest in the sound aspect of the work, and in the early days they did tell me that I had a contract with the sound energy. Okay, and so in the early days I put together some very basic CDs, like basic, because I've always, in any work I do, I love making it accessible to people who don't know a lot about it. I just love doing that. So I made what was called the Basic Technique CD. It used to be on the products list, which was literally just talking people through the really basic techniques like the Maharic seal, the Astral Body seal, those really basic core techniques, as well as very simple versions of all the sounds so that people could hear them and listen to them and learn them. And my son at that point was involved, and he joined me in some of those. And then I also put together a CD, Songs of the Inner Christos, and now you're a sound engineer, and I'm certainly not. And I was playing around with all sorts of software here, and I know it had far too much reverb, and it certainly wasn't professional. But again, it was done with tremendous love, and I know certain people found it very, very helpful. So, so there were all those threads to my
Just
involvement.
real quick,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
shared with me when we talked before that you did the Sacred Son, the Rishi song. Like that was
yeah.
your melody that you did.
Well, it just that's the way it happened. Yes, we were in. I mean, you're a musician as well, and you like sound, and I find, especially with Anuhasi, with that language, it was much easier for me to remember something if I could sing it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
could sing it. Speak it was another matter.
The
Okay,
prayers and the tones and
all
everything.
of
Yeah,
those.
just yeah,
If you can sing
helps.
them, you get them on your ear.
Yeah,
And when we were in France for the Dance for Freedom workshop, which was at the end of it was the end of 2002. I think it might have been October or November. And that's the time when we got the cosmic Christ codes. I don't know if you remember, you know those ones.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And just to,
For
but
Flame
again,
Body, right?
yeah, the flame body.
Yep.
The flame body stuff started to come in around that summer. From what I remember, the first few techniques started coming out in the summer of that year of 2002. Because she did the Dance for Life sometime, I think it was March 2002, where she did we used to do the Surya things, and we began to get some of the early tones, okay? But then the flame body itself came in sometime over that summer, and then it was still coming out. The later techniques, I think the Flame of Air Maria technique might have come out in the September, one of those workshops. And then by the French workshop, we were getting the later ones, for example, the Thanu Manu. I know we got that in France. Anyway, and just to give again, because he's got a lot of bad rap, give Asan or Michael some credit, because he actually did work on a lot of those
Yeah.
codes. And for example, if anybody has a video of the French workshops, um, he would be sitting there while Ashiana was speaking, and you would see him, you know, writing the codes or working on the codes, and totally, I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't hidden from Ashiana; they were right in front of her, and they were incorporated into the codes. And he also had a very big input into part of the flame body work, the whole thing of the witness quiz, if
Okay.
you remember that. It
Yeah.
was a help
Yeah.
because
It was extensive.
his great strength at that time when he had more liberty to speak was about personal development, and he was really good in talking about that. It was really good, and he spoke a bit in France on that. It was probably in the old DVDs,
And so
but
needed.
anyway.
Such a
mm,
needed element with the science too, like to integrate
abs-
all of this together.
and that's where I want to go in this conversation, actually, once I finish this intro bit, okay? But we're putting bits of it in as we go along.
Yeah.
So anyway, in France, we got the Anuhasi text for the Rishi invocation, which is about, I think it's 8 lines. Okay. And I was just myself, I thought, well, gosh, I'm never going to be able to remember this speaking it.
Yeah.
So I started playing around with singing it. I thought, well, I'll play around. If I can sing it, I'll remember it. So I just played around, and I'd kind of hear a bit of a melody and would come into it. And then sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and it'd be going through my head. So at the end of the workshop, I remember the first time I even said it to anybody. I said, we need to get a melody for this. Was in Rennes le Chateau. We were there, which is one of the grids. It was one of the interesting grids, put it that way, that we were in France. And I just sang it for one or two of the other Irish girls. And then at the end, I just said to the two speakers, I keep getting this melody for the Rishi song, and Aisha just sank for a minute. She says, Ma'a, who is one of the Ayani, said, "Yeah, that is the melody. You have it." Okay, so it wasn't that I intended to, but I had such a resonance with that. I just feel such a resonance with that whole Rishi energy, because even when I did the tangible structure of the soul, it was the Rishi technique that really, really, resonated with me more.
I
So,
wanted to
so, and
ask you about that real
mhm,
quick because I didn't.
yeah.
I listened to it like a long time ago, and I'm trying to put it together. Was that how we got the Maharg show? Was with that product, like with the tangible structure? Because it seems like the Rishi gave gives you the Mahart Shield or something? How does that work?
I think, yeah, from what I remember now, and again, I'm open to correction, but the tangible structure was earlier than
Okay.
the Mahart seal, from
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
remember. Now, it was probably about to come in, as it were, because I think somewhere, I think it might be again, and if I'm incorrect, I'll
Yeah.
correct it,
Yeah.
and we get this
No, I
out.
can
And
add
so
pop-ups
if
and
it's
text and everything. So
exactly,
yeah.
but if I'm correct, we just leave it. But I think that the Maharic seal came in after the tangible structure in terms of the actual technique itself,
Yeah.
but the ground was being prepared for it,
Yeah.
obviously. And I remember her saying at some point that it was when the Maharic seal came in, when that technique came in, that it meant that the Christos realignment mission was on course or something like that. It meant it was very significant in terms of the planetary grids.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure because there wasn't in the tangible structure, the Maharic seal was not, as a technique, wasn't there yet. Okay. But there was that linking with the solar rishi. And you're right, there was something about handing something in that. I can't remember the
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah.
So it's probably that the ground was being prepared. But I know that when we got the D12, the Maharic seal itself was symbolic, not just symbolic, but very, very instrumental in getting us back on course.
Yeah.
And I think I remember her
Stellar
saying,
activation.
yeah, and I think that's right because I think I remember saying that the tangible structure was very good up to about D11 and would help us
Oh,
to,
yeah.
all of that, and
Yeah.
then the Arc seal. But yeah, so that was a very early, but still the tangible structure had a lot of very, very, very useful information, especially the handbook, because it had a lot of very
Yeah.
useful definitions.
Yeah.
It was a tremendous basis, like a primer. That and the Cathara One manual were that they actually had it all in one sense, the core information. Yeah. So anyway, to get back to 2005, so we took over the office, because they asked us to, and it wasn't. I mean, it was busier than I had been, but of course, between then and 2012, the whole work expanded. So progressively, the office got busier and busier, as you can imagine. And there were more and more products all the time as well. So more and more my time got occupied with that, like all of the offices. And again, the Azurite Press got a very bad rap in 2012. So I want to put in a few good words for the Azurite Press. It was all done by people, I'm pretty sure, yeah, with all the offices in their homes. We gave over parts of our home to this, all right, because it was a cottage industry in that sense. And the Azurite Press in Ireland, I'm speaking from it here. Okay, there's one room here and it was lined. I had bookcases all over the place, even over the fireplace, with books and CDs, and then there were printers and all sorts of equipment. And then I had also, my storage of CD cases and things were up in the attic at another shed out the back holding other stuff. So it was all done here. And we produced everything and shipped everything out. So you can imagine by the time it got to 2012, I mean, I think if you added up all of the workshops, including the DVDs and the CD versions of them, there could have been 400 or 500 different discs that we would have had in our catalogs. So unless it was a relatively new product or a product that sold a lot, we would often make them up on demand, on order. Say if somebody ordered something that from a very old product, it wouldn't be worth our while making 20 copies of that and having it sitting on the shelves. So I might make 2 or 3 copies. So there was a lot of physical work in doing that and actually packing. But I always felt when I was doing this that I was serving some higher purpose. And I loved, going off to the post office. It was all very hands-on. I'd fill some bags with the packages and fill our little post office with all these bags. And I used to love that trip to the post office, partly because it meant I'd finished that part of the work. But it also was that feeling of, yeah, that work is going out to help people. And that was I felt I didn't really mind how much work it took. Because quite often, if we had a new product, and of course, yourself when the new products came out, everybody wanted to get a new
Oh,
product
yeah. Yeah.
fast, right?
It's a
So
huge uprush. Yeah.
a huge rush, and you wanted to get it to them. So I would sometimes do all-nighters, and I know, I mean, Tammy in America, I used to tease her. I said, "Do you ever sleep?" The amount of work she did was just extraordinary. Um, so yeah. So I mean, when it was busy times, it was often 50, 60 hour work hours a week, very easily. So one of the great things about that, though, and part of it that I loved, was because I was in the office, I was often the first point of contact for people with KS, the first human point of contact. And we had a very good relationship with our customers, you know, very, very good relationship. I mean, at the beginning, I had to learn about packing, and sometimes I didn't pack the stuff right and all of that, but I got over that. But in terms of our relationship, and, people might ask me, where do I start? And, or get a bit of encouragement, or what workshop would you recommend? Because I'm interested in this, that, and the other. So there was a very good, we had a very good rapport with our customers. And even when we closed the office in 2012, we got at least over 100 very, very kind, appreciative emails from people we had been in connection with. And so there was a lot of work, very good work done by the Azurite Press. And again, as I was saying about the recording, I never saw evidence of tampering with any of the materials. If anything, we had really strict protocols, both in the Cathara team and in the Azurite Press, because the Cathara team, it was also implied that we were twisting information. And in the Cathara team, we had a very, very good leader. I'm not talking about Mac now, but Mac appointed somebody to be I suppose the manager might be a good word. And again, I won't mention her name, but she's due a huge amount of credit. And she was somebody who was very, very conscientious about making sure that everything we put into modules was directly from the materials. Very, very conscientious. And we would check each other's work. I mean, nobody ever put anything out as a solo artist. Okay. And the same thing with the offices. Now, in 2005, I think by that stage, there would have been just us and the US office. And I can't remember exactly when, but then there was also a South African office and then an Australian office. So by 2012, there would have been 4 main offices. And we had a very good working relationship with each other. And again, if we wanted to check anything, if we were proofreading and we found a spelling error, we would check that among ourselves. And if it was a very obvious spelling error, we just correct it. For example, in the early versions of the Cathara manual, instead of sacred physics, it was scared physics. So obviously that had to be changed. Okay. So there were some funny typos as well. But if there was anything beyond the obvious, we would check it among ourselves. And then if we weren't sure, we would pass that question on to the speakers. Okay. So there's absolute commitment to doing the best we can. Now, we're all human and we can make mistakes, right? That's different. Okay. Sometimes we don't notice something, or you make an error, like that can happen. But there was a tremendous, I just want people to get a sense, especially if they're new, the sense of family that was there from the beginning was permeating the Cathara teamwork, the recording people, and the Azurite Press. There was a tremendous sense of cooperation and all in this together. And, people in the Cathara team would give tremendous energy, not just to their teaching and creating modules and their study, but on the OD group, they would be constantly available to answer questions from newcomers. And Tammy was always available on the group as well. And people used to keep Tammy's posts because they were so amazing. They used to have a file of Tammy's posts, and they'd have a file of a few other people. I think some of them would have had a file of my posts, because people would have realized, we've all got facets. We've all got, there's nobody who knows nothing, and there's nobody who knows everything. That's really, I feel, true. And, absolutely, it's synocracy. And it's one of the gifts of what you're doing, Chris, is you're allowing voices to be heard. Because, like each of us, as we speak, I mean, I'm certainly doing my best to tell the truth as I know it. It's like when you go to court, okay? I'm telling the truth as far as I know, okay? But I'm fully aware that I might not be completely correct, and that's fine, okay? But I know that some of what I say has validity.
Yeah.
And the same thing with everybody. And if we can, when we're hearing people, and I think this is an important point, is what is our attitude when we listen to people? Are we listening to catch where they're wrong?
Yeah.
All right. Or are we listening to feel out, well, what's true in what they're saying? Because our attention has a creative power. And where we choose to focus our attention is actually a creative process, right? It's not that we ignore. I mean, if I say something that's untrue, and somebody points that out to me, I'm very happy to hear that, because that's good to know. All right. But if people assume that maybe that what I'm saying is going to be all distorted, then they're creating an expectation which isn't going to help them to hear anything that might be true in it. Okay, so it's really important that when people speak, that or that we're not naive and believe everything, or that we're not totally cynical and think, well, what would they know? Okay, especially in what we've seen happening in our shield, where people will have been labelled as something, right? If somebody has been labelled as a fatally, me include club here, that doesn't mean that we've all grown horns. Okay, all right. So, or that we're in particular shield. So everybody has an element of truth, and we all have a lot to learn from each other. So anyway, just to finish my involvement, because we're going off a bit, but I think it's important to bring these points in as we go along.
I
Okay,
did
you have
want
a
to
few
ask,
questions?
maybe just real quick, like, so there was all, I mean, everybody was really connected, it sounds like,
Oh,
and like a
yeah.
family feel. When did you first start seeing signs of the cohesiveness, like dwindling or stopping? Like around, how early was it?
Yeah, I think there probably were seeds of it always, to some extent. I mean, you get that in any group, okay? Now, before I fully noticed it, it was quite late on in the process, because my own attitude when I went to workshops was I assumed people were my friends. Okay, and I'm not answering your question. Okay, I'm going back to your question in a minute. And I was aware, certainly, that people would only sit with certain people, or at dinner or whatever, or they keep seats in the hall. And I never bought into that. Okay. And I would go, when I went to a dining room, of course, if Noel and I were traveling together, we'd sit together. But if I was traveling on my own to a workshop, I would literally get my tray, look around and see where there was an empty seat at a table, and assume I was going to be sitting with friends. So I never got into cliques or to divisions like that, or factions. It was something that I didn't really resonate with. And I always did my best at workshops to welcome new people and not just stay with my friends. So I think that I mightn't have picked up on things because that was my own attitude. But I did notice from around 2010, 2011, in retrospect, I think I was picking up more than I wanted to see, put it that way. It was very, very obvious to me by the time we were in the India workshop. I could feel it very strongly there. And then then the
2011, India.
yeah, that was India, was about, I think it was October, November 2011.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
or Sliders 11.
Um,
After.
yeah, yeah, it was between Sliders 11 and the FOL. Yeah, it wasn't produced as a product, the India workshop. It was recorded, but it wasn't released. But there wasn't that much workshop time anyway, because we were traveling so much. It was a very busy workshop, the India one, very intense,
Yeah,
lots of ways, as
yeah,
you probably heard.
it's like
Um,
audio.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
that's like the Peru thing. There's like audio going around kind of in a shared thing. So it wasn't released, but people are still sharing.
yeah. That's no harm. Yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway, when I really began to notice it was around that time. But again, I had such commitment to what I felt was the purpose of the work, that I almost was a bit blinkered to it for a long time. Okay. And I had begun to wonder about certain aspects of the actual teachings as well. But again, I thought, well, there's more good than not good in it, and nothing's perfect. That was my attitude. Now, the one thing that from quite early on I did not feel comfortable with, and it is something I wanted to bring up now, so maybe it's the time, was the emphasis, which got more and more pronounced, on attack. Okay. Now, if you look at the first responsibility of mastery, just to remind people what it is, I won't quote it verbatim, but it's about freedom from the victim-victimizer blame game. And it's about the willingness to accept all manifestations as direct, I get the exact wording, but as directly emanating from your DNA template for your learning. Something like that, okay?
Right.
In other words, the world, I remember Yesha saying at one point, the world does not come at me, it comes through me.
Yeah.
Okay, all right?
Tobin.
The early work was all about this empowerment, okay? And about accepting responsibility. That's what the A&Rs are about, okay? Accepting responsibility. So for me, from early on, when there would be this talk about attack, oh, the shield is being attacked, or if somebody doesn't agree with us, we're being attacked, okay? That was something that really began to bother me, okay? And I wrote about it in the OD group a few times, right? That how can we kind of, in one sense, say that we are co-creators of our reality, and sort of that we are not going to play into the victim-victimizer game and all of that. And at the same time, anything that goes wrong, we're being attacked. It's their fault.
Instant.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even sometimes, you have a little bit of a car crash, that means you're attacked.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a level of, and I think this is actually core to some of the way things developed, okay? That we absolutely, as Christian beings, become more and more accountable, and that's another of them, one of the A&Rs, accountable, and we see that whatever happens in our lives happens for some reason. Now, my benchmark, I have a few benchmarks that I use, and one of them is, if I see something happening and it triggers something in me, okay? If my buttons get pushed or my feathers get ruffled, okay? Then there's something I need to look at in myself as much as what's happening. Okay, if I have a reaction, I get angry, upset, whatever. And that's somewhere in the early work, go into yourself, check yourself, okay? If I see what's happening and I'm not emotionally affected by it, then it's something maybe I can just bring light to the situation, or love to the situation, okay? Bring frequency. But, when we see people going into extremes, and this wasn't just at the core of the shield, this was happening, it just got more and more throughout the whole shield, this emphasis on we're being attacked, we are, and if anybody disagrees, oh, you're attacking, okay? And at a certain point, as a Christian being, we expand in self-accountability. We expand in our knowing of our own direct connection to source and our own empowerment. And if we're expanding in empowerment, how can we say that it's somebody else's fault what happens to us?
Yeah,
It's
it
just so
changes.
contradictory.
Something changes. You reach a plateau, and there's it changes. I
Mm,
know. I've seen that in my own healing. We're just kind of you move
absolutely.
away from the. It's almost like just entering a whole other paradigm of just
Mm,
not to go there anymore, and just you hold that accountability. And I think
mm,
that's a lot to do with your pillar, and how you're holding yourself in life and things. So,
absolutely. Absolutely core. So that's one distinction that I look at. And another, because there's a lot of talk of Christ and antichrist, and what
yeah,
was it, something Christ, what, hypocrist, or whatever it was
yeah,
said.
yeah,
Um, and, when you think of what the Christ is, it is like the divine manifestation blueprint. Okay. And if you think of it in terms of, say, the crystal spiral, and the crystal spiral, and by the way, the work that was done on the crystal spiral was done completely in collaboration with Yesha. Okay, well, certainly by
the
her request. Okay,
the
all
work
right.
that was done.
The,
I mean,
the diagrams and all of that Noel did. Okay,
the
but I
nice
can
work.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely,
that's going to be
because
for. I was bombarding you with questions for Noah, and that's going to be for him. I need to ask him directly a lot of the
absolutely, but
questions. Yeah.
certainly yes, because And just getting back to there, like, because a lot of us said about the Cathar team. The Cathar team, some of them were really, really good at doing diagrams. Not just Noel, but there were other people as well who did a lot of those PowerPoint versions of the grids and the God worlds and all of that. It was never, nothing was ever the work of one person. It was always checked, but they were used extensively on the graphs in the main workshops. So they were never done behind anybody's back. They were used. They were welcomed.
They were
Okay.
approved. I mean, they had
They,
to go through
but they
approval.
were approved to the extent. Well, they were approved to the extent that they were used, and credit
Has
given
there actually been?
during the
I haven't heard
workshops.
any accusations as far as that being tampered with or anything. I mean, with the
Well, there were some
products.
allegations around the mathematics in
Was there?
2012.
Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Like
Can find
intentional,
them, but
intentional stuff.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. There was a lot of what's the word? Just a particular, how would you call it? A particular a kind of a level of assertion. A lot of it wasn't ever proven or given substance, but like insinuation. That's what I should say.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it. And it is in some of the things that came out around after May 2012. Absolutely. So anyway,
Yeah,
but
because
if
I
you
don't know how
think
far it goes in the court stuff or anything. I know that that's like.
yeah, we don't want to go into too much of that. But anyway, if you think of the crystal spiral, and when Noel was working on this, he was getting very excited when he realized, and it was again from Aish's work, like there was a lot of cooperation at that time, that the core difference between the crystal spiral and the Fibonacci spiral was that every point in the crystal spiral connects with its core, with its source, with its connection, right? So no matter where you are in the crystal spiral, no matter how expanded you are, there is still that core connection. Okay, all right. And no matter where you are on the spiral, also you have that connection to within, and then the expansion going out. Okay, so it's like we have a direct connection to source within our own being, and that's the energy of the crystal spiral. And when he was obviously, it was a big wow, and it's so simple.
In math.
And yet so powerful. It's in maths, it's everywhere. And when he was doing that, I said to him, but like, it's almost like from because I could get the feeling, just like with those early codes, and I see you have one behind you as well. I think we both have the Rashatan behind us, which is kind of funny.
On the left side.
Exactly. But with those codes, with those early codes, when you look at those codes, or for me anyway, because I taught so much Cathar that the Cathar grid is almost engraved in my brain. And it reminds you are a direct expression of source with all that implies. You might forget it, but you've never been forgotten. And you are divine, you are precious, you are loved, you are worthy. Even if you're the most fallen of fallen angelics, you are still equally beloved as anybody else in creation, because that is the nature of source. So those diagrams remind me of that. And so when he showed me the early stuff, and I said to him, that's like a mathematical version of the attitudes and responsibilities. They're both saying the same thing.
Yeah.
They're both saying the same thing, back to source, because every one of the attitudes uses the word all oneness. Every one of them. If you look at the attitudes responsibility, it's whatever they are. I have some of them here, right? And it's always, for example, love is recognition of the truth of the all oneness, impeccability, upholding and protecting the all oneness. It all relates back to the all oneness, right? And the responsibilities also do. They keep bringing us back to ourselves and our connection with ourselves. So it was like looking at a mathematical version of the ANRs for me, the crystal spiral. So that was fabulous. So I don't know how you got onto that, but I just
when was that all brought down? Like what year was that? Like the crystal spiral? There was like one workshop that actually contained that. I think like when the prayer and everything was given. Was it around the same time as the prayer, or was that?
Sorry, which prayer is this now?
The Crystal River prayer.
Yeah, no, I think that was the Crystal River prayer would have been around early 2007. Okay.
And that's when
it
the
was
math
early.
was given for the crystal.
It was around, and I couldn't give you the exact time. I know that like the chronology, I'd have to check exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
but the Crystal Spiral certainly had been, I'm pretty sure had been started on that before.
There was a
And
workshop called the Crystal River Dance, I think, or something. Where all
yes, that was that one.
is
It
that
was FOL of 2007, I'm pretty
mm,
sure. Okay. Um, I'm pretty sure on that because then, yeah, later that year we had the Amsterdam workshop, and I think we already had the Crystal River by then.
yeah, Amsterdam
Okay,
was
and it was also
huge
the
too.
year, yeah, it was the year of what we used to have, the 12 tribes groups. You
Okay.
probably didn't hear of those, did you? Around that time, it started kind of, I think, at the end of 2006, where the speakers wanted to have small groups. In at that time they were living in Phoenix, near Phoenix,
Oh,
and they wanted small groups. I forget how many, about 15, 20 people or something like that, every month. And people applied to join because if everyone wanted the chance to be in a small group, of course, and there were or obviously more people applied than there were places. So it was actually Noel helped them to organize a kind of very fair kind of lottery type thing and just assign people to different groups. Um, so a lot of people would have had that time, like over that time. I forget when they started with them. I think it might have been in January. I think it was January 2007 they started with the 12 tribes groups. And it was around the time of the Crystal River because we went over to the one in March. I remember that and they finished shortly. Well, they were 12 months or maybe a bit longer. So it went over throughout 2007, and then Amsterdam happened near the end of that, and that's when we got the information about the Jeshua lines. That
yeah, and the
information.
Iridanis and the resurrection
Yeah,
texts. That's amazing.
yeah,
Yeah. We used to
it's
do
amazing
those.
stuff. Yeah, and the connection with the Jeshua line with the Netherlands, Ireland, and somewhere in with the one of those native Indian lines. I can't remember the name of it now. The White Buffalo Woman, was that the name? There was some connection with one of the American Indian lines as well,
Oh, I
with the
didn't catch
Joshua
that.
12 line, the Joshua
Okay.
12 line, yeah. So we got that information towards the end of 2007, yeah.
I bet it was just
Um,
a huge celebration when the Crystal River spiral, all
it
the
was
math and
beautiful.
all this was anchored in. That's been,
Beautiful. It was beautiful. It
yeah,
was absolute. I mean, those days where it's almost like the halcyon days of KS, do you know, where there was that sense of us, again, of all being, you know, like we're all there with a common purpose. Of course, there's always going to be some little flutters of individual stuff going on in any group, but it was really, really, really nice, really loving and that. So as I said, when you were asking me, I mean, that was a lot of my attitude until somewhere late 2011, early
wow, that
2012.
late. Because
I
I was thinking, there,
well,
I mean, how was Aurora Earth? Everything was fine with that. There was a lot of people that,
yes, similar things happened there. And again, I want to give because Aurora Earth started off with a great vision.
yeah,
Okay. And I was privileged to see one of the very early drafts of that because I was over in Norway. It came from one of the Norwegian group. And again, he knows who he is and people know who he is. I don't want to mention names individually on screen, but he had a very, very wonderful vision. Okay. And I was over teaching one of the courses and I was staying in his house and he showed me some of his plans. And I know that another third team member had also seen them and they were amazing. He had such a beautiful vision for Aurora Earth, where it was going to be, holding these frequencies and then, expanding them out to different areas of life. And then with the idea that that we would connect with people in other systems who also had, like, there was an area for medicine or healing, and my one was contemplation space. So that would have included things like mindfulness and whatever. And there were ones for science and one for sport and one for music and arts. So there were,
really something
it
from the future. It felt like just anchoring all of these teachings in, making a stream to the future stuff.
it was a beautiful template. It was based on the law on the 12, like there were 12 things and then the one in the center. So
Articles.
it is a tremendous vision, tremendous vision. And I think what you're kind of asking directly or indirectly is why, why do things change, right? And I think many of us have asked that. Um, and just something that I want to, I think we've covered enough of my involvement to give people an idea that I've had a fair bit of involvement, put it that way.
Right.
All right, at this stage, okay. Um, and that I do have some experience with the work. I think that's the main thing.
I mean,
And just to say,
when I started the group, I was hearing your name, like mentioned, a lot of people like, have you talked to Rose? And Rose and introduced me and did this, and just a lot before I even met you, like before he,
mm,
and then eventually contacted you and wanted to know you from every. I mean, your obvious presence of yours in this
yeah,
group that you had contributed towards, the work that
yeah,
you had done.
thank you. Yeah. Well, many people
Yeah.
had, and I really, you know, I will when I'm in, if I give myself to something, I give myself with a lot of commitment, and I tend not to want to, you know, because I'm realistic enough about human nature, if nothing else, to realize nothing's ever going to be perfect when we're on the human plane. So I think I would have just seen things going on and yet kind of held my own space and my own purpose as much as I could, and I just wouldn't kind of get into gossip. I had very little time for gossip or for discussing other people. And that was one of the things that bothered me when I realized people were being discussed so much and that kind of thing. Um, and so it is something I kind of, maybe I was a bit naive, but maybe it was protection as well. And as I say, I would have gone to every workshop feeling these are my friends, these are my family. And in every family, there are going to be a few people that are a bit interesting, put it that way. My own family, every family has a few ups and downs. So I kind of had always felt, well, once my purpose was there. But somewhere around 2011, I really began to feel, do I actually resonate with the actual frequency of what is coming out now?
Mm.
All right. It was just beginning as a kind of a question. I'd questioned some of the things, especially this constant emphasis on attack, right? For a long time, I really didn't resonate with that. But I kind of said, okay, well, that may work itself through.
Well,
But
speaking of attack,
then,
real quick, so I mean, because there was a lot of a huge buildup towards the failsafe and towards all the split stuff, everything.
mhm,
And
mhm,
with the, because I'm going back and remembering even, I think it was FLO10 when we had the Fibonacci spiral that was latching on to the crystal spirals, like right at this date. And some people said that's actually when the breakoff occurred, when all this
mhm.
other math stuff. What was your experience with that? Like, I mean, because that was a huge attack, like 55 spin and all this, and the Metatronic seed atom and everything. Was there already signs back then with that? Because there was huge implications with the attack then also.
There was huge implications. I think I might get back to that
Okay,
shortly,
all
if
right.
that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
But
It was just a really intense time. I just remember
it
a
was a
lot.
very intense
Yeah,
time. It was a very intense time. Okay.
yeah.
Um, so anyway, I began to feel, and for me, it's. I mean, I think I have a reasonable. I'm a reasonable capacity for sort of not expecting people to be perfect or anything like that, okay? But I do have certain internal barometers as well about things that feel to me that are in integrity and that aren't, okay? And I began to see partly the information, but partly attitudes and behaviors that I felt, no, there's something that does not feel right at all to me here. I began to feel very uneasy. And it became more clear to me there was a January workshop, and then the last one I went to was in April of 2012, one of the Sliders 12 ones. And by then it was tangible to me. The atmosphere had changed so much. To me personally, it felt like the energy had got a lot more aggressive in the shield. It felt more the divisions became very obvious. People began to that
Drawing
shunning had.
lines.
Yes. And again, I really found it quite shocking, the extent of it. I knew some of this was going on in the background, okay, that the seeds were being sown. But I mean, personally, I did feel, for example, there were people that I would have thought were my friends, okay, and this shunning started, and I couldn't understand what it was. I just, what's going on? And it was very unusual for me to I spent most of that workshop in my room because I just didn't feel at home anymore. I didn't feel it was my family anymore.
This was
I
the
could feel
January
a,
one, 2020.
no, the March one,
March.
the Easter one, the when it was maybe it was Easter. It was around Easter,
Mhm.
but it was very different, and I felt very uncomfortable during the activation on the beach, right? But the thing is that, and this is something that many of us as indigos can have, is a bit of self-doubt. Okay, because in your introduction to these videos, you say something quite rightly, that we all have our perceptual filters. Totally agree with that. Okay. But one of our perceptual filters can be not to trust ourselves. All right. And not to trust our own knowing. It can be just as damaging as thinking we know everything. And so for me, and I know because I've met a lot of people since, especially in the last year, who moved away from KS or who were pushed out. I've met a lot. Okay. And a lot of people felt that they felt something was off, but they thought it must have been something wrong with them. Right. So the initial thing is to doubt yourself. And I think part of that was me. It must be something wrong with me. But so even there in April, I felt that activation on the beach, and I had to distinguish, is it just because I'm feeling this energy from people, or is there something else going on? All right. I had to, because I do go back into myself, and I'm quite, I do take that thing about being accountable and taking my own inventory. I take that quite seriously. But I went away. I knew when I left, and I remember still going out of that hotel in Sarasota and passing a table where some people that I used to be very good friends with were sitting and getting some strange looks, and I knew I'd never go back. I just knew I'd never go back. So I think the seeds were there for quite some time. Another thing I just want to mention is that, there was a lot of talk at the time about the different shields. Okay, the blue and was it the green, blue, green, yellow, and then the
Violet
violet
shield.
shields. Yeah, okay. Now, at the time, I thought that was grand. Okay, and because it made sense to me, and also very quickly, I had a feeling sense I would be in the violet shield anyway, and that turned out to be the case. I heard I was in the violet shield, and that Noel and I were to be, I think we were to be in the centre of the violet shield with Mac and Curry. And to me, that felt absolutely right. And I actually felt it was an honour, because how the violet shield was initially described was it was to help people who had maybe fallen or gone to the extreme into darkness, if you like, but had learnt and come back from it. Right? So it was for people who maybe, whereas the blue, kind of thing, yeah. The blue shield was kind of like almost implied it was for people who had never fallen, or for people
Core,
who were very
just like the
clear,
color.
without that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Okay, yeah.
Violet's
And
kind
the
of on the
yellow,
outskirts, on the outreach, outer
yes,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Green's
And
like in
I
the
was
middle.
actually,
Right?
yeah, that kind of thing,
Okay.
okay? Now, if you think of what the core principles of KS were, that we are all equally valued,
Yeah.
okay?
Yep.
And any role we take is a job. It is not a measure of our worth, of our intrinsic worth. And what happened with that, I was extremely happy to be in the violet shield. I felt it was absolutely right for me, partly because I know I have gone to extremes of darkness, and I'm fine with that because I've come back from it. Okay, but also I know I have tremendous respect in my own life for people who have maybe gone down, if you like, a dark road and have come back, because by golly, do those people have a lot of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Say if you're an alcoholic and you want to, who's better to help you and coach you than somebody who was an alcoholic and has healed that? They're going to be able to help you far more. They know far more than somebody who studied in college. And that's the same thing with anything, like a criminal who's done awful things and then reforms. They can reach other criminals, if you like, much more than somebody who's a goody two shoes.
Yeah.
All right. So I had a tremendous, I would have been honored to be in that position. And partly as well because my great respect for Mac. Okay. So at that time I was quite fine with that. But the next thing, that became a pecking order. And that became, oh, the blues are better than the violets. And the next thing in some of the work afterwards, like there was something about the violet shield were not being subordinate to the blue shield. And I mean, where do we come from a Christian society where we suddenly have to become subordinate to somebody else?
All this
And
was
it
in
became,
March already. Like
it was
this was
around, well, the subordinate bit came out in something else, but around that time there was this thing about the shields. And at that time, originally for December 2012, we got these very intricate diagrams in the, I think it was in the handbook for the January 2012 workshop, if that's still available. Whatever sliders that would have been. But sliders, I can't remember the name of it. It mightn't be a slider. You can see anyway, January 2012.
Okay.
And there were some very intricate diagrams about where each of the shields would be in the placement on the beach for December 2012.
Yeah.
Okay, and where the violets would be and where the others would be. So that part of it's fine for me, absolutely. But there was then this sort of sense of, if you like, spiritual snobbery really began to rear its head. Like, you know, and then I began to notice, because I began to hear from the January workshop on particularly, I began to hear that different people's names were being dragged through the mud. Okay, and again, not going into any names, but a lot of people, particularly Cathar team members, their names were being dragged through the mud. Right? Awful things being said about them, this kind of fatally thing being said about them. And I was looking at some of the finest people I knew being labelled and being discussed in ways that felt totally, totally out for me. And I knew I was being discussed as well. All right. And so I just felt there's something not adding up here. Okay. And so I knew by the April workshop I was never going to be back. I came back, I was very confused because I really didn't feel I wanted, if I could have, I would have finished my business contract straight away, actually, to be quite honest, but I couldn't do it straight away. Okay, in terms of running the office. So I went through a lot of inner searching. And then, so then, of course, and again, I know that in between all those times, because I would hear people having been treated horribly, I got a bit of that myself in April, and, you know, it just didn't feel right to me. Right to me in the sense of what Christic is, because for me, I mean, I know we can talk about Christic to the cows coming, Christic and non-Christic. For me, it's a very simple criteria I put for myself now. Christic is empowering. It is connecting us to source. It values everybody. It can be strong when it needs to. It's not a walk. It's not a pushover. Okay, but everybody is respected. Everybody is valued, and we take responsibility. In the early work, you look after your own garden. Okay, because if you're running around, I mean, if you think of it like gardening, even. All right. And if you're in a neighborhood, like I'm in a block here. Okay. Now, if I spend my time peeping into everybody else's garden and say, oh, look at a mess there. And look at a mess that. Oh, look at that one. Look at that one. Oh, God, that one is a bad. What happens to my garden? It's probably worse than any of them. Right. Yep. Whereas if I take care of, even if the other gardens are in a mess, if I take care of mine and say nothing, it might inspire other people to look after theirs. Okay.
Did you feel any sense that things were this critical that they had to be looked at as something that could have possibly been a virus being transmitted? Was there any part of you that resonated with that at all? That there could have been something you might not have noticed or anything?
Yes, there could have been a virus, but I just wonder, I mean, you know, and I'm going to be quite outspoken here, okay? In the early days, we heard things like, the best way to hide something is to put it right in front of you and call it something else. Okay, all right. That there were certain things happening, but were they being attributed in the right places? Okay. And there's another point to it, is that I always think if you're coming into your Christic power and your Christic embodiment, which by goodness, after 10 years, all of us should have been. Many of us were doing the techniques for 10 years. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. At least 10 years. To me, embodying more and more the Christ is like developing a healthy immune system.
Yeah.
And if you've got a healthy immune system, and even on a physical level, you can be beside somebody who's got the flu and you don't catch it. Right? So to become the problem, even if there was a virus, the solution is to strengthen your own immune system and not keep pointing fingers at the virus.
And to me, it was like to pull together as a group, not just scatter out everywhere. Like I was trying to pull people more together to do group texts, and I was getting advice just nonstop, like to stop and don't come together. People can get infected this way, and just it was reversed of what I was, my inner logic, everything that's in my core. You know, just it didn't make sense.
It does not make sense, Chris. I was going to say Chris to you, Chris. You are Chris. My father's name was Christopher too, so, and my brother, so I have a great love of that name.
My grandfather.
All right, okay. But it does, you see, that is one of the core things. And that, what amazed me, Chris, and I don't mean it as a criticism of anybody else, why people allow themselves to get so frightened of that.
Yeah.
Okay, because honestly, if we have the techniques, those early, and it's the early techniques, I feel, quite honest, I'm not on board the late ones, and I can say why in a minute. Those early techniques reminded you, you are a living, breathing embodiment of God's source. And the more you embody that, the more you will naturally embody the ANRs. I mean, the ANRs aren't just, if you like, a roadmap to developing Christ consciousness, but they're also a barometer of how far we have embodied it. If you look at the ANRs, and as you embody more of the Christ, okay, you would naturally experience more love, more grace, gratitude, respect, responsibility, trust, accountability, impeccability, mindfulness, fearlessness.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't just
Engage.
go away. There's no U-turns there. It's just expansion. It just keeps going. You know.
Okay, engaged detachment, joy. They would be, so it's not just that as we want to become more Christic, that we focus on these as is very good and intend to embody more of them. But if we are embodying the Christ more and more, we could look at this and see, well, how am I doing? Okay, now, is it Christic to get terrified of speaking to an old friend just because somebody else told you they were infected? All right, it's different. I mean, we can't keep in touch with everybody. Okay, on Facebook you can have 1 million friends, okay, or 5,000, but you can't have a personal relationship with more than, relatively small amount of people. And there will naturally be in any lifetime people come in and out of your life. Okay, that's okay. And sometimes we may need to put boundaries between us and certain people if it just we're not able right now to handle their energy. But that's something from our own consciousness, our own empowerment. No, I'm sorry, I just have to keep you at a distance for now. Okay? But people, what I want to get to now, Chris, is that I feel what happened is, okay, on one level it looks like it was about the 3 people at the center, about the 3 speakers. And yes, they each have their part in this, okay? But what really got me thinking afterwards was at the aftermath. And I thought, why are people behaving like this? Why are people believing this? Why are they giving into that fear? Why are they allowing themselves to be set against each other? Why are they not thinking for themselves? I mean, that's really what that shocked me actually even more than what happened in May. Okay, that didn't entirely surprise me, some of it, and I can get on to some of that in a minute. But what shocked me was how people were just so willing to believe everything because of a particular angle that was put on the Christmas story. Okay, and as that whole energy, I'm going to call it a consciousness, because at this point I'm not interested in the names of any race group or indeed anybody's title. What I look at is, do I sense Christ from them? Okay, and Christ means empowering, respectful, non-Christ, anti-Christ, whatever, is what is fear-based, division-based. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about what energy it was, but whatever consciousness was coming in more and more at that time, all right? And the division, the fear, the name-calling, and then this whole fatally thing was the ultimate disempowerment. I mean, in the early work, we were encouraged to value our own knowingness before anything else, to question, if we hear something, we run it by our own knowing first, and we have a responsibility to do that, okay? It isn't just that it's a nice thing to do. As Christians, we are accountable for where we put our energy, if we want to call ourselves Christians. And yet, when I saw how quickly people got polarized, that was what really, really shocked me afterwards. I just could not believe. And I mean, it was almost like a lot of this got played out on Facebook, like Facebook wars and trial by Facebook. And it was like people felt they had license to be nasty. And they had license to say the most awful things, especially about Mac and Asan. And they almost got applauded for doing so. All right. People got friended and unfriended like the Dickens. I mean, within about a month, I'd lost many people that I thought were my friends. I was no longer their friends on Facebook. And, before May 2012, they probably liked me. You know what I mean? So watch that, then that began to help me to see, what happened in a broader perspective. I said, this isn't just about the people at the center. This is about the whole shield. It's about a whole collective rite of passage and a need for spiritual maturity. Because, when I saw what was happening and moved away and went into a very, very deep period of grief, and I just want to mention this because I know that many people that I've met since who went through this, okay, all experience this, and I just want to give a voice to that, okay? If you think of that, we had all been part of this really loving family, as we thought, and the next thing you find yourself cast into the desert, okay, without any explanation, by the way. I was never directly told anything that I'd done right or wrong, okay? So you were just cast out into the desert, and for many of us, that led to a very, very tough year or two, okay?
Was this just like a letter just saying like the office is shut down, that's it, no longer needed? I mean, how was this?
No, it wasn't even that, Chris. No.
Cast out, like I'm just trying to get...
Well, cast out in different ways. Okay, in terms of the AP, with that story, with what happened in May 2012, and if you remember the revised version of the Christmas story.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I need to backtrack slightly here.
Yeah.
And that the original work of the Keylontic science was given through the Ioni. Okay, and I've just got notes here to make sure I'm accurate with what I say here. Okay, now the Ioni were if you like, the authors of the original work. I mean, Ashiana was obviously the translator or the secretary. The Ioni's work would have been the early work, like the Cathara manual. Sorry?
I was just going to ask, like, what, because, the work was always expanding, even after sliders and into the Cosmeus and everything, and Dimension 12. What frequency or what dimension was the Ioni at? Like, what residence, I guess? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just going to give a very brief, and because the work, and we can follow this up maybe with a text thing, because you could go forever on the. But if in the early work in Voyagers and in the Dancer Manual and several of the early manuals, there was this kind of 4 or 5 pages giving a list of the downstepping from source and the different race lines, like the that the Yanas and all of that.
Okay.
Do you remember ever seeing that? Okay, like a downstepping. You see, why are these things not available now, Chris?
Yeah.
That's one of the things we're going to get at.
It would just be interesting to like link that exactly where, because we have the actual locations of these families and collectives and groups and everything, and what all these upgrades. They have the Mashayana that came in to save us from this and that, and all these collectives. So getting to the core of like who actually presented this would be interesting to like see the location.
It, it's actually core to what we're talking about. All right. Okay. Now, this is a very brief summary, and I just want to read the notes I took from the work here. The Ayani are of the Yanas. Now, the Yanas is the point of all union, like the Unicycle code, the Yanas. Okay. You know the way Ashiana and lots of people have Yana at the end of their names. Okay. All right. So the Yanas is the first expression
You
of
guys can eat the
consciousness of
pizza if
Source
you
coming
want.
into creation.
The brownies.
So Source comes into creation. Its first expression of consciousness is the Yanas. And this is in the lots of those early. For example, I have the dance form manual here. Okay, and the name of the text, actually, if somebody has some of the old materials, is Administrative Levels
can eat
of
that
the Emerald
pizza.
Order Melchizedek Cloister. Okay. It's in the dance form manual. It was in Voyagers. It was in a lot of the early work. I think it was probably at the beginning of the Cathara manuals as well. I can't remember, but it was certainly at the beginning of a lot of them. Anyway, okay. So the Yanas is the first expression of the consciousness of Source coming into creation. So in that sense, it's not a being. They're not beings and personified forms as such. They're more aligned to what we used to call the primal sound fields. Okay. So they're beyond form and individuation. They're all-knowing and eternal. Okay. And there's obviously, when we say that, there's a part of each of us there.
This is the actual
because we've all come through this. Yeah, we've all come through there.
This is the actual
Okay.
description that was given.
Yeah. But it's a summary now. I mean, I because I'll always be here all day. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I could read the full thing, but as I say, it's. I mean, I could read just the first description if you like. I will in a second. I think it's important. But the thing is, the copyright issues, I have to be careful.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Which is a whole other story. But anyway. All right. So the Yanas, and that's why you get a lot of people having Yana at the end of their names, because it's that recognition. So all-knowing and eternal, it's the sound fields. And in this text, it's described that the council, if you like, the first sort of level of councils at that Yanas level are the Ayani Elder Council, the Melchizedek Cloister Ayani Elder Council, our cosmic family of consciousness. Okay? So at that level, the Ayani are like the Elder Council. Okay? So their Elder Council, like the Order of the Unisai.
And then like again, the foundation, everything else stands on.
Absolutely. Yeah. The foundation or the absolute ground, if you think of it coming from the ground up.
This is important, like to explain to newcomers, because they're going to delve into this and like see all these upgrades, and saying, okay, well, we got closer to God type stuff that we needed at this time because it was like more emergency. So we eventually discovered, these closer to core God as we went. But you're saying that this actually started core up, like this was our foundation up. That's very distinct that we need to make here, that distinction.
It's a core distinction, Chris. It's an absolute
you notice core. That, like in the work, I mean, through sliders, I keep going to Mashayahana, going back to that. Everything was just upgraded to these different collectives, and the interpretation was that we're getting closer to God, closer to core God frequencies, and now it's the FEs,
Yeah, it keeps getting. There's always another one. There's always another one, right? And that's a clue, okay? So, you know what I mean? Because in a sense, if you think of the way creation is structured, now obviously there are other people better explaining the detail of this than I, but I have a very good feeling sense of this. As we get closer to source, there is less intricacy, if you like. There is less. I mean, it's when source moves out into manifestation, then you have all of the different formats. And that the whole point of that is source is coming from its unified self into the different dimensions. It downsteps itself so it can experience more and more variety and more different expressions of itself. Okay? But as we integrate back into source, there is less need for structure and less need for all sorts of different categories. So as we move back towards source, things become simpler rather than more complicated. Complication is a factor of manifestation. Okay? As we come back to source, ultimately it is beyond words and beyond categorization anyway.
Not as far away too, like not way out somewhere.
in some galaxy
pyramids.
far away.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Gotcha.
I mean, that is in the early work. In the early work, it said things like, for example, and I can say this because it's the name of a book by somebody else, but it was mentioned. There's a book called "Behaving as if the God," what is it? "Behaving as if the God in all things matters." You probably heard that one. It's by a lady who did a beautiful garden with. She was very in tune with nature. Perilandra was the name of her garden.
Okay.
So, behaving as if the God in all things matters. And in the early work, it said something like, that is the only sane way for a Christian being to live. Right? Okay. So anyway, so the yanas, and we have to ask ourselves, and I'm not going to sort of put too much of my own interpretation onto this. I just like to put this out and let people think about it themselves, because we learn far more. We need to listen to other people, but we learn far more then from how we integrated ourselves than if if all the interpretations are handed to us. Okay. But why would it be that there is no mention now of the Ayani? Right? That newcomers, even you are not even a brand newcomer, okay, have not heard of them. Why is that? Okay. So
It's
the
not in the
Ayani,
Crystal River Prayer, is it? I don't,
I think they are somewhere.
is it somewhere?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes,
Okay.
it is. I'm pretty sure at the end of it, at the end of the Crystal River, and the name of the Melchizedek Cloister Emerald Order Ayani.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's in the end. You can
Okay.
check that. Okay.
All right. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I really feel this is absolutely core, Chris. Okay. Because as far as possible, what I want to say now, and I know we're probably going to go over the 2 hours, but we're just got to an important part.
Mm-hmm.
As much as possible, not to associate this with individual personalities. It's much bigger than that. Okay. So the yanas are the first expression of the consciousness of source coming into creation. So they are not personified, and they are therefore they're almost beyond form, they're beyond individuation, the primal sound fields. Right? So they're part of like absolute purity. And I can remember years ago, Shiana used to say that, something like the light can deceive, but the sound cannot. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of saying.
Yeah.
Okay,
That
all right.
stuck with me a lot.
So yeah, the sound. Okay, so this is the level that they come from, and the Ayani is the order of the Unisai, which I think is in the Crystal River Prayer, is the direct line of ascent from source. Okay, and they don't need intermediaries at that level. Because we are there too. At that level, we do not need an intermediary to mediate for us with source. Okay, because we are source. Okay, and we are source here too. We just haven't fully remembered it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's in the early work. All manifest beings are faces of source manifest. Okay, so source isn't in a galaxy far away. Source is as close to you as you're breathing. And that was said in the early work. Your next breath is as close, or when you look in the mirror and you see that light in your eyes, it's as close to you as that. Okay, and the early work confirmed that for us. Okay, so they don't need individuation. And then the next level of expression, because the whole thing of creation, source moving into creation, is to explore and to have a relationship with itself, as it were. And again, that's in the early work. Okay, it explores, so within its own context, it can actually have a relationship with parts of itself and expand its own information, its own knowledge of itself. So that is all of us. And the next level of projection is the Rishi level, which is the primal light fields. So this is where we come into the light. And at that level, in terms of the Ayani, on the sound level or the Yanas level, there was the, the elder council, the elder Ayani. And on the Rishi level, you have the primal light fields, and these are the Ayani master council. Okay, so they are at that level. And I can just mention some of the other names, because these were, when we talk about the Yanas, there were, if you ever remember the early time matrix diagram, do you remember that one? Okay.
Early time matrix one. I'm trying to think. Was that like the egg one? The harmonic universe?
Right, the egg one. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in that one, if you remember, and we need to ask ourselves, why is that not readily available right now either? Okay. But in that one, when you look at the primal sound fields, you might remember that there were three kind of lines there. Okay, like you had the 15-dimensional matrix in the center, and then you had almost
light,
like the egg,
light blue.
almost like the white of the egg, if you like,
Yeah,
around the
yeah,
side. And there were three kind of sections in that.
yeah.
Okay, and you had the Grandianas, who were the Emerald Order Yanas or Blue Flame Yanas, because you probably heard of blue flame, violet flame, and gold flame. Okay, so that's where they are. That's where the source of those is. Then the gold flame or the gold order yanas, the second level of the energy matrix, is the Vachayanas. You've probably heard of them. And then you have the Ramyanas, would be the violet flame or the amethyst level. Okay, so they're all in the yanas level. And then we come into the founders races at the Rishi level, and they would be the main expression of those would be the Ayani Master Council. Okay, and they would have again different expressions, the main ones being again the Emerald Order Elohai Elohim, the Gold Order Seraphai Seraphim, and the Amethyst Order Braharama. Okay, and then there would be a continuous sort of downstepping. All right, and then there would be different downstepping basically throughout, and we could spend a whole session on this, okay? But there's a downstepping then of that same line coming from source itself through the yanas, through the primal light fields, density 5, moving down, okay? And the Ayani line is the purest of those lines. And it was the Ayani who were given credit for the early work in all of the texts. Okay, so in a sense, they are speakers, the role is more like a translator, okay, a secretary. She's just taught herself like a secretary, okay? But the information came through that Ayani line. And we all have parts of ourselves at that Ionic level.
To get here, like to be born through here. Right?
Exactly. Okay, but there's the Ayani. For example, the member of the Ayani that we would hear about most in the early days was somebody called Ma'a, M-A hyphen A.
Line, like that was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay, the Ayani. All right. Exactly. Okay, so the Ayani would have, and they are credited in the early work with all of that early work. Okay. And with the Christmas story. And that's partly what I wanted to get back into that. They are the ones who gave the Christmas story. They are the ones who made the speaker appointments. Okay, and we have a document about that as well. Okay, so the Ayani's work was always about empowerment. Okay, about empowerment, because if you look at the early work, they will not mollycoddle people. They, because sometimes people say, oh, well, where are the Ayani? Where are the guardians? But at that level, a real teacher, a real master is not going to do things for you that you can do for yourself. They're not going to come in and rescue, right? They know, even as a parent, you know this. I mean, if your little lad is struggling to tie his shoelaces or whatever he's trying to master, you're not helping him by doing it for him. Right. You're actually disempowering him, all right? So the Ayani have as their core, if you want to think of two core sort of attitudes or states of mind or whatever. There's the one of empowerment, and its contrast or its opposite is control. All right.
I feel that we became more reliant as time went on these collectives and just like giving ourselves more.
Absolutely. And in a sense, I see what happened. At this point, I see that it had to happen. Okay, to make us all grow up. And I feel certainly for those of us who have gone through that dark night and come out the other end of it, put it that way, that we feel that this has been one of the greatest lessons we've ever had in our spiritual journey. And we're actually grateful for it. I actually, at this point, and that's why I waited till now to speak with you. It's been on my mind for a while, but I did not want to come to this with any sort of sense that I was a victim. All right, or any sense of anger or resentment. Okay, I feel a passion about it, but I really don't feel any anger or resentment. So people who have come out the other end of this, and I've met several over the last 6 months. I've met several of them face to face, actually, and they feel that it actually has been really the biggest spiritual lesson in their lives. And in a sense, Ayesha actually has been our greatest teacher ever. Absolutely. And I actually feel to some extent, when I used to teach TM, it was the first thing I ever did. And Maharishi used to say, the government is an expression of the consciousness of the people. Okay, so what we see in the world, and that applies, I'm sure, to what we're seeing in your beloved country right now too, and indeed in ours,
Absolutely.
that we can't blame them. Okay, they are an expression of the general consciousness. And this came to me in the aftermath of 2012. I thought, well, why is this happening? Because some of the things that were said or implied, both in that talk, that thing at the end of May 2012, and in the subsequent messages and transmissions from Speaker One, I knew some of those things not to be true. Okay, absolutely not true. Okay, and I also knew, I also could feel a whole way that people's names were being dragged through the mud, and that people were being accused of things and not allowed to defend themselves. All right, and to me, one of the most precious any of us has is our good name. Okay, and to take somebody's good name without good reason, it's something that I've done it. Listen, we've all done it. Okay, but to me, I find it. It's just I can't go along with that. Okay, but people, the perception of several people was colored so badly because of what happened there, and it does go back to what I was saying about the Ayani as well. I want to go back to that. But the perception of the Azurite Press, the Cathara team, speakers 2 and 3, and the recording team was so colored by what happened, and people were willing to believe it and give their power, that I began to see, that the potential for what happened was already there in the shield. Okay? It almost had to happen. It was an outpicturing of what was there, because how else could it have taken hold? I mean, you heard, I don't think you were there either, but you heard the recording of that May 2012 thing. People were cheering and clapping and triumphalist. I just found that, even if it was true, it should be shocking. It should be saddening, right, to hear that. But to the triumphalism and the righteousness, and we're the good guys, and so all of that was in the shield, and in a sense it had to come to the top. So in a sense, it's almost like what happened to the speakers was symbolic and an outpicturing of what was happening. And so, they were serving, to me, looking at it almost as examples of what was happening in the shield. Because I know I've seen you and a few other people on Facebook just shocked at the behavior of people, and how people felt they had the right to be nasty and to say what they like.
I was caught up in it too, I was, very active in the group, and just feeling all of the celebration and towards her, and just like trying to process it and put it together. And
Of course.
I did get caught up in it. And then, it took me a while to take a few steps back and just say, wait a second, there's something that's way off with this, that's out of balance with this. But human emotion and being in a group setting and group mind, it's like you do get caught up in it. There's a lot of there's things that happen with that,
Absolutely, Chris. And it's really good that you're saying that, because when I'm saying that, I don't mean that as for people to suddenly start feeling guilty or feeling awful, because I actually feel, in a way, it had to happen as a demonstration. And, just as a segue, I'm not going to talk about excessively now, but one of the things when I really went into a very, very painful place for a year or two after it happened. I mean, for about 2 years, I had an ache in my heart and stomach because it was like being cast into the desert. It was like absolute shock. And one of the, and I'm just saying that not because I'm fine with it now, but I know many other people did. Okay, it was hell for some people. But one of the things in December 2013, I kept asking for guidance, where do I go next? And I explored a lot of other teachers, and I actually really enjoyed the freedom I felt to listen to other teachers. Right. But one of the things that I came across, and I know I was guided to find it, was a system called radical forgiveness. And we are going to do a separate, just short version of that on a separate video, because for me, it was of all of the things I did, helped me to see this in a much, much broader perspective. And I've shared it with several KS people, and they have found it very helpful. Okay. And one of the things that radical forgiveness brings, people don't have to believe this to do it. Okay. But the processes lead you to being able to feel it. But one of the first things when I heard Colin, I listened to one of his audiobooks, Colin Tipping, and he said, what happens, things don't happen to us, they happen for us. Now, this is on a spiritual level. They don't happen to us, they happen for us, which is a very similar thing to the ANRs, like the first responsibility of mastery, saying the same thing. Yeah, saying the same thing. So if you think from a spiritual perspective, okay, if you were able to stand on a mountain from your Rishi level or your whatever level and look at what we're doing here, okay, we might see that these dramas, it can even be when we have conflict with people or a relationship breaks up, even in those human situations. And then I'm sure you've had situations where you've had a relationship break up and at the time you were heartbroken, the worst thing ever happened. And then 10 years later, you go back, oh my God, that was the best thing that ever happened, right? I learned so much, and thank goodness I did. Exactly. All right. Now, from the higher perspective, I really feel that that's how our Rishi, Avatar, Maharata level, whoever, sees what's happening. Okay. But you can't just think of that. It's an energetic process. So I will, for people who want it, because I don't want to force it onto anybody, we're going on longer than we thought, so maybe do it another day to see how the time goes. Yeah, okay. But just to do about an hour on radical forgiveness, because I can talk people through 2 of the processes, and if it's to be for them, they'll know that from that. Okay, all right. So I just wanted to make that segue. So where were we before that?
It's on the way back was Ioni. You were presenting.
Yeah.
Your point on
okay.
That,
Yeah, now the point on the Ioni, and I know this may ruffle some feathers, but it does need to be said. Okay. There are a few aspects to this. One of them is that the original work was given by the Ioni. Okay, and as you've just reminded me, they were mentioned in the Crystal River prayer. Okay, to some extent. Anyway, okay. Now their main, that's what I was saying about them. Their main theme, if you like, is empowerment. To be a Christic being, you stand in your own light, and you stand tall in your own light. Okay, and they do not. They don't sanction control or telling people what to think. And it's in the early work. Christian graces will never tell people what to think. They will never tell people to read or not read something. They will never tell people not to talk to somebody or to talk to somebody. Okay? And what have we seen happening in our shield? Okay, people were told not to talk to so-and-so, not to talk to so-and-so. All right, so that's so strong in the early work. Okay? Now, also, when you look at the Christmas story, the original Christmas story, that was given by the Ioni. Okay? And again, I think that may be available somewhere. Hopefully it is. Okay? They are mentioned at least 6 or 7 times in the introduction.
Right.
All right? And the Ma'a character in the story was one of the Ioni. All right? Okay? So they are mentioned. They are the originators of the real Christmas story. I think it was given. Yeah, it was given, 2001, 2002. Okay? All right? So it's their authority wrote that Christmas story. And they are the authority as well who appointed the speakers. And that has significance. We may not have time to go through that.
Well,
okay?
Just for the contrast, I mean,
yeah.
her case now is, this was off the CDT plates. Those plates were tampered with. They were edited, and all this information was taken out. Now she's reading off the Alhambra Camara plates. I forget. And so, I mean, just to like kind of set everything what this is. Like we're putting everything
I know.
on one person's ability to read fields and to read these plates, and this is our accepted truth to be a part of this group, to follow this and to accept this. So that's kind of what that's where it's gone now, is that these plates are no more, and now these are new plates. So all of that's just obsolete. That wasn't right. So I mean,
Well, but that's the core that we're coming to. Listen, the dog just wants to get out. Can you just 1 second?
Sure. Mace, you can eat that other piece of pizza if you want. Okay.
Now, there's only so much of this talk a doggy can listen to.
Yeah. All right, mine took off right away.
Yeah. Right, so we're actually coming to the nub now, Chris. Okay.
I mean, because this is newcomers too. They've got to put all this math together, everything. We've got to lay it all out.
Why have newcomers not heard of the Ioni? Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's not out there. No.
It's not out there. So I think we will just look at these in a few different ways, and it's really more valuable for people to feel out the frequency and to get their own answers as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
that's what I tell everybody.
That is really important.
Present both of it. Just like, look at Qatar, look at this, look at that. Do it for yourself.
Exactly.
You got to do your own math.
You've got to. And it's not just that it's better for us. We actually have a responsibility. Because if, as Christian beings, we are to stand tall and we are to be a member of any self-respecting Christian race, we do that on our own merits. Okay? We don't do it because we're a member of a group. Yeah. Christian is self-empowered. It is connected to our source. It is standing in our own light. It's being absolutely accountable and responsible.
It's
okay.
Having all options available. That was emphasized a lot in the work. The Christic option has to be available. That's blatantly
having
clear.
All options, all knowledge available. You make up your own mind, and you know, in the attitude, in the responsibility of mastery, when they talk about integrity, they say it's something you cannot leave home without. Okay, it's an energy reality. Christ consciousness is an energy reality. And we don't ascend or go anywhere worthwhile simply because we are a member of a team, or because we wear the T-shirt, as it were, or because we go to workshops. Okay? We're not going to be able to go, as it says, go anywhere worthwhile unless we are embodying that ourselves. And it's like when you go through airport security, and even if you're going through with a group, each person has to go through individually. So we have to, it's our own frequency. Now, what we're looking at here is the Ioni, and this again is my interpretation. I'm open to being corrected, okay? But I am speaking from a deep truth in myself. The early information constantly put the power back on yourself, okay? And so, where do teachings lead us? Do they lead us to our inner connection, or do they lead us to an external source of authority? Okay, that's a very, very core point. And I'm not even going to label it according to a particular race line, okay? Just if you think of two consciousnesses, okay, because I'm careful of labels here. A Christian teaching or a Christian agenda or whatever will constantly lead you back to trust yourself more than somebody else. Okay? Right? Because you have to do that. And even if you make mistakes, you'll learn from your mistakes. Listen, which of us has not learned from mistakes? You did something stupid, okay, but I'll learn from it. Okay? So the Christian races will allow you to do that. They will not tell you who to talk to. They will not label anybody. They totally abhor any kind of discrimination on any basis, and that is in the early work.
Sometimes encourage the experience, to go down. But you need to get this for the muscle, to get stronger.
Exactly. Okay. Now, when we look at the way things changed and whatever great group came in, whatever the consciousness is, because honestly, at this point, I'm not really interested in names because I've heard people having all sorts of fancy names,
Alhambra,
fancy
Glacier,
contracts, whatever the names are,
right?
okay? All right? Because, as we source, the closer we get to source, the less need there is for terms and terminology. And terminology only has meaning. It's only got value if it gives meaning. All right? It can actually become a distraction. Okay? Too much terminology. And I think we've seen that happen. So if you look at the early work, which was about that, your own empowerment, every one of those early codes that was based on the Cathara grid had the implication your connection to source is here. If you remember in the flame body connection techniques, you went in here to that point, and from that point, you expanded more into yourself. So to expand into your higher aspects, your deeper aspects of self, you didn't have to go out anywhere. You went within. Okay? So that is, for me, that would be Christian. What is the Christic? I mean, that's very, very key to what it is. And that's how I felt with the early work. Now, if you look at what's happened in latter years, okay, and let people feel this out for themselves. I mean, is it Christic, for example, with this whole thing of fatally? I mean, from what I saw of the writings, everybody else will know you're fatally, but you won't. You'll be the last to know. It was something like that, wasn't it? It was something like, we will know, but you won't. Okay? That is the opposite of empowerment. Okay? Now, it also had
Well,
the effect.
do you believe that there could be a condition that gets that bad? I mean, because there's physical ailments of, people going senile and stuff, Alzheimer's and all these. There is a consciousness field of that. Do you think that there's a spiritual condition that could be that?
I'm sure there is, but the antidote to that is getting stronger in yourself. It's building your own immune
Empowerment,
system.
right? It's not
Absolutely.
casting out.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And we do not have a right to take other people's inventories. Okay? All right. Now, we have a right, obviously, if somebody is physically dangerous or something, obviously, or, if somebody's a murderer. I mean, obviously, we need to know about it. Okay.
Boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But do we have the right? I mean, what was going around was absolute rampant paranoia. I mean, give it a name. I'm being direct here. I don't care at this point. You saw it. People were terrified. And then I'd see people writing in, is this Christic? Somebody put a song up or something, and I saw, is this Christic?
Enhanced a lot.
Yeah. But what people were kind of asking some of the time is this approved?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what's
now? Why not?
How much was that before, though? It seemed like that's always been kind of a thing. Let's have things approved.
To some extent, yes. Yeah. That's what I mean. I think the seeds of it were there for a long time. Yeah. But, at a certain point, we need to take responsibility to feel out, to feel it for us, take feedback from other people, of course. But we need to be willing to decide for ourselves.
Yeah.
All right? We need to grow up. We can't be children. Because, if we're not willing, if we want to sort of ask the teacher, is this okay, basically? Okay? We're actually abdicating our own personal responsibility. Because then if it isn't okay, because she told us it was, it's her fault. All right? And so we, even if we decide something is, if I listen to a song and I think it's Christic and then it turns out not to be, well, I'll learn from that and I'll know the next time. Okay? But if I ask somebody else to tell me, now I can ask you what you think and take that on board. That's different. Okay? But if I abdicate my personal responsibility to somebody else, then I am actually, I'm not, for one thing, I'm giving away my power. I'm not honoring the Christ within me. And I'm actually putting a huge load onto that person.
Yeah.
Okay? Because a group of us were here recently. It wasn't even in relation to what had happened in the KS community. Because another thing that's important to realize is, what we've seen happening in our group is not exclusive to KS. Yeah. I've seen this happening in several groups, and I know I listened to your interview with your mom, which she was a very wise lady, very nice lady. I've seen it happen in many, many groups. Okay. And I think one of the things as KS people, we do have in the early work, most precious, certainly for me, the most precious information I've ever seen anywhere. Okay. But that we very quickly, as a group, began to exaggerate our own importance.
Yeah. I mean, that was even
Okay.
addressed. Like you were talking about Dance for Freedom. Michael Dean
Mm,
was Assan was addressing that like before she came out to give the
mm,
presentation. Like this has become an issue. How many? What was it like? If you can take this many breaths, or the 144
mm.
Merkabah breath things, or what they were teaching at the time. Like who was able to do more? And for them
Exactly.
to address it back then, that says a lot. That there was the seeds.
They're the seeds in every group, to be
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
honest. Okay. And actually, I sort of feel that if we can look at this from an empowered perspective,
yeah.
we may have a very valuable role to play as a group to transmute and heal
Oh,
some of
yeah,
these perceptions.
yeah. That's
Okay?
that's a lot of my. I mean, this
Mm,
year I've started the interrelation interviews. Just to
yeah.
try to do that and see what other groups are doing. Because if we have the
Mhm.
capacity to do that now, and people to come out of this alive from the other side of the split and talk and speak out, that's super empowering. That's not really done in groups, group settings. So they
Exactly.
usually just hang on to that stagnation and just
Mm.
they accept it, and the other side accepts it, that you're going to stay here, we're going to stay there. But if you're able to like bridge that, that's very powerful.
It's incredible, Chris. It really is. And, it's happened, as I was saying to you when we had a conversation before this, whenever it was, a week or two ago, it is actually almost like an archetypal pattern that happens in
Yeah,
groups.
yeah.
Okay. Now,
Archetypes.
I don't think any of them had the information we had, to be quite honest,
Yeah.
that information, but that information doesn't just belong to one group. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's cosmic information, those codes. But the thing where, I mean, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and the one true church, and non-Catholics were the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. I was in another meditation group. We were the ones, and if somebody was an our type of meditator, they were the good guys. The other guys, oh, don't do yoga, that's bad. Okay, um, it was. I saw it in several groups. Your mother saw it in her group. You saw it growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a really good book to read, because I'm just trying to broaden this out. This is an archetypal pattern we're healing. Okay, and in that sense, the speakers, the people at the core, have actually given us far more than we realize. And they, I think, have paid the price in some ways, each of them in different ways, right? Because they've all gone through a rough time with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Core.
And as you said, Michael gave an awful lot of great wisdom in those early days.
Yeah.
And you say that he was aware of that kind of pecking order thing, and he was very quick to spot it and try and quash it in people, and not quash it, but point it out. Okay.
Right.
But it is and characteristics of those groups, there's a very good book. The characteristic of those groups is that we are right. We've got a special mission. The world is divided into us and not us. Okay. The center, whether it's the teacher or the guru or whatever it is, has absolute power. And I don't think that's always the teacher's fault. I actually think it's projected onto them.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because I've been a teacher to a much smaller degree, and I find that sometimes people would project stuff onto me, even when I was involved in chaos, and people would almost expect you to be God for them,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Sign the
And I would find it
contract.
very draining.
Yeah.
It's very draining. It's actually very draining if people
Yeah.
put that on you.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had the people at the core, and you had thousands of people putting that on them. I mean, there was an incredible pressure.
Right.
All right. So people who really did not want to sort of stand on their own 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in 2012 is a lot of the people who were blacklisted, and I'm using that word because there was a blacklist, who were blacklisted and put out, were the people who were strong enough to ask questions, right? And they had to be pushed away. Okay. I mean, I was not allowed into that Alhambra group, that e-group. And I wasn't welcome. I was let known I wouldn't be welcome in December 2012 at
You
the workshop.
applied. This is what I want to go into. It's like
Mm.
the sincerity of doing some of the new techniques and the prayers and everything, and like
Mm.
what your approach was with on an emotional level. Because I mean,
Yeah.
this happening this quickly, and all the emotions that were coming in. You say you're just now healing from everything.
Yeah,
So I
it's
mean,
a very good question. I'm glad you brought me back to that.
okay,
Yeah, yeah. Because there's so many threads to this, like
yeah,
it's monumental, really. Um, but yes, I when that all happened, part of me really felt very, very uncomfortable with everything. But then you still have that part of you which is, well, maybe I'm not, maybe there's something wrong with me, and maybe that is right. Okay, maybe and that's a healthy thing to some extent, because I'm, to think, well, maybe there's a point to this. Okay, so I
Self-awareness.
was willing, exactly. So I was willing to give it a go, even though I didn't like at all what I saw happening. Okay, but and I know, and I know enough that I have my own shadow to know I could, I'm quite comfortable with the fact I have a shadow. That's okay. Goodness, we all do. But so I did give the techniques a bit of a chance. Okay, I did that very first one that was sent out that everybody had to do,
CDM, August.
whatever that very first one
Yeah.
was, in May
Mandatory.
20. Yeah, so I did that one. It was kind of okay. I did it, and then even though I'm not as attuned to the maths, say, as Noel would be, I'm very, very. I think, having taught guitar so much, I'm very aware of the frequency of codes. I wouldn't be able to describe them mathematically, but my whole body responds to them. Okay. And for example, say the codes you have behind you there, any of the codes, the early codes, when I look at them, I feel my whole being expanding. Okay. So I was very interested to see the new codes as they came out. And I looked at them and my whole body just shut down at looking at them. Okay. I just could not resonate with them. I'm aware of the maths in them now, the fives and the eights and all of that, but I saw them, and to me, like when I look at, and this is just, I'm not, they may be fine for some people. And just to say that I have met a few people recently who are doing the new work, and we've been very friendly with each other. And it's fine, it shouldn't matter which side
Because
of the
a lot of bridges happen. It's amazing. Like, I mean, there's
yeah,
people like that were in your position running offices and still actively doing the new stuff, like very
yeah.
active and feeling
Does
it,
it? Yeah, it
feeling the
shouldn't
codes,
matter.
you know. Yeah.
It shouldn't matter. Like, we should be able to speak with each other, whether we're doing the new codes or not, whether,
Right.
no matter which. Like, and I think that's very good. Okay,
Yeah.
but for me, so it's fine. They may be right for
Yeah.
certain people.
Yeah.
Okay, but for me personally, I began, because like the stuff was put up on the internet. You see the new products coming out and
Yeah.
everything,
You said you
and
did the
and
journey and it was okay. It was kind of okay to see that
I
into.
was kind of okay. I didn't feel one thing or another, to be quite honest. And there was
Okay.
so much turmoil going on with us here with the office that
Sure.
I just surrendered at that point,
It's
and
interesting.
I
But no
but then
big like harsh reaction or anything. It wasn't just like repelling. Like it was. It
no,
wasn't anything that's pushing.
it was neutral, actually. It was
Neutral.
quite
You
neutral.
didn't feel
But I
anything.
really I was so anxious just to move away from the organization at that point
Yeah.
because of what had been said about us. So I wasn't
Your
probably as objective.
perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Um uh you know um because certainly I did try it, and then obviously when I realized I wasn't welcome in December 2012, I thought, well, obviously that frequency doesn't want me, so I must look at it again. So I had to
Okay.
move away and just and sort of get beyond my personal sense of hurt and all of that.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
but when I saw the new codes, I I just didn't resonate with them at all. When I look at the old codes, I feel my whole being expanding. I feel my connection to my eternal self. Okay, when I look at the new ones, I don't get any of that.
Well, there's no
I get
cathar grid. There's no visible cathar grid that's in the new
exactly,
ones. That's a huge element.
yeah.
And I look at that honestly. I still do look at that. That's kind of gone now, and it's way. When I think about it, like when I'm integrating it personally, like how far away is that cathar grid, and how like the trails they go back to it, the journeys of like way out. That is kind of a reoccurring thing for me to look at. That I'm still putting together.
It's core. It's core, Chris,
Yeah.
because it's core. Because even
It's our
we
anatomy.
both
It's the planet. It's
it's our
everything.
anatomy.
Yeah.
We both have, interestingly enough, the Rashutana behind us here.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
and from my knowledge, and again, I could be wrong in this, but I think that's the last code that was based on the Cathar grid.
Yeah.
Okay,
You were
and
saying.
on that the early work, I think it is. Okay, again, I'm open to correction on that. But so that, and especially any of us who knew the early work and seen the progression, you knew the mathematics, even if you couldn't explain it to anybody else, you knew they were there.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at the, I know somebody was mentioning the codes to do with the sacred sexuality
Yeah.
set, all those beautiful Rosetta codes,
Yeah.
and all of those are based on the Cathar grid as well. You know, you can
Yeah.
see the flows of creation.
This
Okay.
this is the evolution. This is the evolution of sacred sex, isn't it? Like from those codes. If I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. It's hard
Yeah.
to know about that too.
Yeah, I think they came out around, certainly some of them came around the time of those sacred sexuality workshops. I think they might have started a bit earlier that year. Was that 2006?
I don't
Yeah, I think it was 2006. I think some of that early information about those flows came up in the Tenerife workshop.
Yeah.
And then it kind of built, and then those sacred
Torrency data
sexuality,
and everything.
all of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that all came out. I think it started around Tenerife, 2006. And then that summer was the three sacred
And there's a
sexuality. There,
ton of Cathar grids and sacred sex. I'm just going over it now. It's just
absolutely.
like it's
Absolutely.
everywhere. Like, yeah. It's,
Yeah. So the Cathara grid implies, when you look at that, you know it's about your direct eternal connection to source. Okay. So, but I did try to give the new work a choice, what you call it, a chance. Okay. Because I thought, well, you know, it could be me. And maybe I am hopelessly fallen or whatever, and I might need it. But I just could not connect with them at all. And when I look at them still, I kind of, ooh, I go like that. And somebody showed me the new codes. Though I think they're out on the internet now. The ones related to the more recent webinars. And again, I
with
just,
the
I,
sun flash and everything. Well, some of that is
yes,
actually based off the old Vecca codes. The Quanta Rua actually was the kind of the template of the new stuff. Like she went back to that Vecca code, and that was way back. So
mm.
it's interesting. So I want to ask you, like, why, on a personal level, why do you think this is? Do you think that it really is like maybe a family thing, where people are carrying like Alhambra family codes, so they have the resonance for that? What's your interpretation of this? Of why people feel this, why other people don't? How do you see
Well, I
it?
mean, certain it is resonance, obviously. I mean, it
It's
is
real
resonance
to
with
the
particular
people. Yeah,
frequencies, as
you
it
can
is
see
real
it.
to people,
Yeah.
and that's absolutely fine. Okay, but the main thing any of us have to ask, okay, and go back to, maybe we can kind of lead to a finale with this. Okay,
Okay.
the main thing any of us ask is, where is this asking me to put my power? Okay. If we look at the ANRs, are these becoming more of a reality for us? Um, you know, how do we feel about other people? How um, do we have still got, because what seemed to come, and it was always there a little bit, but what really seemed to come very strongly was this whole thing of elitism, right? Came out very strongly. And if there's any sense of being so special, or that you're indispensable, or that you are very important because of your contract, then, you know, it might be time to look at that. Okay? Because our importance and our value comes from the fact that we are source in manifestation. And when you know that as your reality, I mean, in the early work, Ashiana once said, you know, if you can say, I am God, without either feeling you're blaspheming or that you feel you're special. Oh, I'm God, and nobody else is.
Yeah.
Okay? If you can say,
The
I am
right
God,
spirit.
as just almost like a fact, almost like it's no big deal on one level,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you know so everybody else is. All right? So if I am God, and you know, that's what chaos gave me in the early days. I am God. God, gosh, God, I'm God. All right? And then it's very, very shortly you begin to realize so is everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay?
Can't not be.
And it can't not be. Okay? No matter how awful somebody behaves, they are precious faces of source. So we cannot call ourselves Christian in that real sense if we feel we have the right to look down on other people. And you know what happened when, you know, that new energy came in, but it was coming for a while, but when it came in, was even things like the various color shields, okay, which may or may, you know, they may have been a ways of branding people as much as anything else. Okay, like, well, you're the violet, you're this and you're that. But it became almost like the violet shield became almost like the bottom rung on a caste system. It became like a caste system.
Well, there's actual new mechanics that were given to that about how the violet reversal, that was emphasized a lot at the post fail-safe workshops.
I know.
So kind of
But if
leaves an
you,
impression on people. Yes.
absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm standing here in front of, I mean, I'm quite willing to show my face as one of the Violet Shield. Have I grown horns? That's for people to decide. Um, you know, and it's one of the reasons I actually felt to do this interview. Hopefully, it will be helpful, because I actually feel that I don't think we're at the end. I don't think we're at the last chapter of this story.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay.
I feel that.
Yeah, we're not at the last
It's not
chapter,
over.
and I feel we have, as a collective, maybe set ourselves quite a vast task of maybe healing a lot of this. Okay, and I just want to give credit, or to say to people, the people who moved away, and especially the people who were pushed away and went through a very hard time. And a lot of them I know have come back and stood on their feet again, and they feel stronger. And I want to say to them, or to you, if you're listening, if you're one of them, that you have actually made huge contributions to the Shield by actually coming into your own power and your own self-worth. And even if you don't feel part of it, you have actually contributed hugely to, I think, a much bigger outcome of what's happening. But I do want to acknowledge to people that it has been very rough on some people, very, very rough, and very painful. But to say to you, there is nothing wrong with you. As John Kabat-Zinn used to say, there's what does he say? There's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. Okay? And I think that's so important. If we label people and then treat them as unworthy, it was almost like the Fatally and the Violet Shield became almost like untouchables. Right? Okay? What place has that got? If the people feel they're holding this big contract to anchor the Christ, how can they possibly be afraid of other people?
I just want to say that we're talking about roots and like the foundation, the yane and everything. The root of this whole project was based on the problem of the elitism that was happening. To be honest with you, James Pover introduced an idea for a post, and we went back and forth, and that's how Chaos Reality Check was born. It was off of that, and it was all based on elitism in the Shield and this being a problem. And so I just went around asking asking them the question on this: are you seeing elitism? And I had an overwhelming response to enough to boost to create this group, and eventually to lead to these interviews. So that's my core. That's the core of this whole project. It was based off of that, to expose this and to bring all this out. If you backtrack and see where it all came from. So yeah, I mean, there's some relevance with that for sure. That has been an issue.
And what is that a symptom of? You see, it's a symptom of, if you have to. If you, now I'm talking about you, but anybody, if you have to feel important or have a big contract to feel good about yourself, then are you actually feeling your Christ connection? All right. Okay. And we've seen a lot of confusion, a lot of people identifying with titles. That's why I'm not really interested in the names of races. I just wanted to speak about the Ayani there. But a race can call itself anything. Okay. All right. Just as we can give ourselves any fancy names. And I'm less and less impressed with that.
Well, we see it with our own races here in Density 1 with the humans, all the stuff that we're kind of working out, the human races, different races of the humans.
Absolutely. And I think as a Shield, we may be processing a lot of this. Because, there can be people out there in the world never heard a word of any of this. And they could be anchoring far more of the Christ than any of us in this group. Right?
Absolutely.
And in a sense, to think that we have, especially if we are going around being elitist and arrogant, and feeling we are the bee's knees. I don't know if you have that expression in English in America. And then we decide we are going to host people, those poor people out there. there's it doesn't
It
resonate
changes
for
the
me anymore.
frequency a little bit. Yeah.
How dare we?
Yeah.
How dare we actually? I mean, I have had friends, people who were my friends, kind of looking down on me. Okay, all right, and obviously personally, I had to kind of get over that bit of it. And I can remember speaking with somebody once, somebody that I thought, because we can look at people and see, gosh, they're magnificent, okay, and somebody who's in the general chaos family, and this person and I was saying to this person, but you're just you've got such magnificent qualities. I could really see this in this person. And this person said, but that's not enough. I really feel I'm here. I have to do something big with my life. And I said, being your, and I didn't realize how prophetic for myself this was, to be the fullness of who you are. Why isn't that good enough? I mean, why do you need a big contract to justify yourself? Because if we have to justify ourselves and our existence by the fact that we are in this shield or that shield, or we've got some big fancy name or fancy title, we're actually selling ourselves short. That's only a fraction of who we are as God source beings. And even if we can end, we might publish near the end at this point, but if people can feel their worth, your worth has nothing to do with how anybody else categorizes you. And I know that several of the people who were banished, if you like, or who left, have come to that. They're standing straight again, or they're learning it.
That's awesome.
That their worth has nothing to do with what anybody else says about them. Okay? And the other thing I just want to touch on is we will do the one on radical forgiveness. And I just want to acknowledge too that I mean, the people who left early or who were, I mean, I look on it now like I was pushed out of the nest. You know that expression, right? The mother bird has to push the baby bird off so the child learns to fly. Okay. So I actually feel very grateful for what happened. Okay. Because I was giving a lot of my power away as well. I was reasonably empowered, but I was giving power away. So I got pushed out of the nest pretty early. Okay. Go fly, dear. Right? No hands, no support. Okay. So a lot of us who went in that first wave, I know several of them are feeling so much stronger now, and a lot of people are actually looking to get the old work again. I've seen that thread going through a lot of places. Okay, but I'm also aware, and it's not because of what anybody's told me, but I just feel in the shield that there could be people either recently or even currently going through what some of us went through in the early days. Okay, maybe because just again,
wave, I was trying to catch that.
well, but I mean, but the first wave is in 2012, right? Okay. The people who were either pushed away or left when that whole thing happened. Okay. Or just before. There were some people actually, when I look back, they were very shrewd and they began to move away. They felt it earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. And they just moved away. Okay.
Because it is ongoing. I mean, there is still this emphasis, this push, it's still being fueled. I noticed that, like there's people that still are very wanting to stay divided, just keeping that line very clear, like they're not allowed back, that's it.
That's just, exactly.
Holding their ground on that. So.
Yeah. And what place has that got in a Christian society?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. All right. But so, but frequency-wise, exactly.
Want to hold that and just like, it's just so heavy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and I don't mean this unkindly, but I mean, if that was the only hope of getting, if going with a group that is excluding everybody is your only way out, would you actually want to be with such a group? Mm-hmm. I mean, would I want to ascend to a group where half of them are looking down at me or afraid of me? I know. I mean, I'll take my chances. I'll take my chances here, honestly. I mean, why do that to yourself? Have enough self-respect. But I do know from what I've heard through the grapevine and various places that over the years, some people have been, that the kind of split has continued and has got more and more towards what might have been originally the core, put it that way. I've just heard that from many sources. And some of those people.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So some of Yeah, okay. Now, some of those people may be going through an awful lot of very, very deep pain, okay, and hurt. And just to encourage them, there is light at the end of that tunnel, and that it isn't pleasant. It may feel like the dark night of the soul, but for many people, it's actually an essential. It's almost like an essential initiation into true empowerment. Okay, and I just want to read. There's a really good quote that I have here from Hermann Hesse. Okay, and it doesn't apply to everybody, but you know, we talk about the Christ being connection with our core being. And at some point, that means we need to let go of any attachment to anything external, all right, to validate that for us. Any group, membership of a group, approval from anybody, it's almost like we need to let go of any prop, okay? And that can be extremely lonely, but what it helps us to do, it's almost like, those old-fashioned switchboards where, the operator would plug you in, okay? Now you plug yourself in, but you can only do that with and for and by yourself, okay? So it can feel like the darkest and loneliness of times before you actually manage to fully do that. And there's a really good quote here from Hermann Hesse. He says, "We must become so alone, so utterly alone, that we withdraw into our innermost self. It is a way of bitter suffering, but then our solitude is overcome. We are no longer alone, for we find that our innermost self is the Spirit, that it is God, the indivisible. And suddenly we find ourselves in the midst of the world, yet undisturbed by its multiplicity. For in our innermost soul, we know ourselves to be one with all being."
It's an excellent place to wrap it up. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for sharing. It's just
And
extremely courageous, everything across the board. Thank you so much.
it is courage. But what the root of the word courage, Chris, is the French word cœur or core, which means love.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and
That's the
it does
roots.
it did take me courage, but I knew it was the right time, and I would like to, because I know a wide variety of people will watch this, and I want to express love for everybody I have met through KS. Um, honestly, I feel love and respect, and because of the work I've done on myself in the meantime, I am so grateful. And that might seem strange, so grateful for what happened, because I actually see it as the biggest spiritual initiation I ever had, probably in many lifetimes. And I know several people have felt this. And no matter what side of the fence, it doesn't matter whether we're onto the new teachings or the old teachings. Can we respect each other, and can we let go of the feeling that we personally are indispensable? Because in a funny kind of a way, you know, we reduce our effectiveness the more we get into that sense of elitism and feeling we're indispensable. Because our true power lies in our connection with Source. And that brings a genuine humility. And this may be a very good place to end. And humility does not mean not the kind of humility I got, certainly in the Catholic Church, was, "Oh Lord, I'm not worthy." That's not humility. Humility is when you know yourself as Source, and you, at the same time, know everybody else's source. It's like the spirit of Namaste, where the divine and the sacred in me recognizes and acknowledges the sacred in you, no matter what role you're playing, no matter what hat you've worn. Okay? Everyone is equally loved and valued at that level of source. So I think that's a good way to end. Okay?
There isn't one without the other.
Absolutely. And then there will be the option of the radical forgiveness one. If people are interested, they
Yes.
can watch
Yeah,
this as a
I can make
separate
like a whole
entity.
playlist of this one and that one too if people want to see it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, thank you so much, Chris, as well.
Thank you too. Awesome. All right, Rose
And
Tobin.
namaste.
Namaste.